Hello, friend. Welcome back to Sleepy History with Alan. And if this is your very first time here, well, I am so glad you found your way. Come in, lie down. You are exactly, precisely, perfectly where you need to be. Take just a moment now, a small, slow moment, just for yourself. Adjust your pillow if it needs it. Feel the blanket, the weight of it, the warmth of it. The way it settles over you like something that has always known exactly the shape of you. Notice the bed beneath you, the firmness of it, the steadiness, how it holds you completely without asking anything of you at all. Good. You can breathe a little slower now. There is nothing you need to do. Nothing to plan, nothing to remember, nothing to solve or carry or arrange. Whatever the day brought you, whatever it left on your chest or in your shoulders, you can set it down, right here, right now, gently, like setting down something you've been holding for much longer than you realized. It will keep until morning. Everything will keep until morning. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you are warm. And tonight, you have nowhere to be but right here, with me. So, let me tell you where we're going tonight. I want to take you somewhere that smells of wood smoke and warm water, and just the faintest whisper of lavender. Somewhere that moves slowly the way early mornings used to move, long before the world decided that everything needed to happen all at once. I want to take you to the 1800s, not the version you find in textbooks, not the grand, formal version, not the presidents, not the proclamations, not the dates you were supposed to memorize in school. No, I want to take you to the small version of the 1800s. The quiet version, the human version, the version that lives in a farmhouse kitchen just before sunrise, when the only sounds are the tick of cooling iron and the soft breath of someone still asleep in the next room, and the faint, lovely sound of water being poured from a ceramic pitcher into a ceramic basin. That version. I want to show you a woman, we won't give her a name, so you can imagine her however feels right standing at a small wooden washstand in the early morning. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbow. Her feet are bare on the wooden floor, cool and a little startling beneath her, like the morning itself. She has poured water from the pitcher into the basin. Just barely warm mixed from the stove pot and the cold water from the night before. It steams very faintly in the cool air of the room. She dips both hands in, and she holds them there for a moment, eyes half closed, feeling the warmth spread up through her palms and into her wrists. Just present, just here. That moment, that single quiet moment is where we begin tonight. Because here is what I find so quietly extraordinary about ordinary people in the 19th century. They were clean. Not in the rough, careless way we sometimes imagine. They were clean in a way that required genuine effort, real labour, true intention. They carried water from wells and pumps and rain barrels. They heated it in heavy iron pots on wood-burning stoves. They made their own soap from ash and rendered fat, or saved carefully to buy a bar from the general store. They washed their faces every morning, often in the dark. They combed rosewater through their hair. They brushed their teeth with chalk and charcoal and crushed dried sage. And on Saturday nights they pulled a tin tub to the centre of the warm kitchen and bathed properly, fully, with a seriousness and ceremony I find genuinely beautiful. What strikes me the most is that their cleanliness was not simply practical. It was about something deeper. It was about dignity, the private daily act of saying, I am worth this effort. My body deserves this warmth. Even here, in this small life, in this ordinary place, I will care for myself with tenderness. Tonight, we follow that thread together. We'll move through the morning splash, the Saturday bath night, the apothecary's shelf, the barber shop, and the warm smell of sun-dried linen. We will move very slowly. There is no hurry here at all. This is Sleepy History with Alan, and I am so glad, so genuinely, warmly glad that you are here. Let your eyes close now. Let your breathing slow. Feel how still everything is. Feel how safe. Nothing needs you for the next little while. We are going somewhere beautiful together. Let's begin. Before we step fully into our story, let me paint the world for you. Let me describe the house. It is a modest farmhouse, somewhere in the American Midwest, sometime around 1850. The walls are timber-framed and whitewashed inside. The floors are wide plank oak, worn smooth in the places where feet travel most the path from the door to the stove, the patch of floor beside the kitchen table, the threshold of the bedroom where the door swings open every single morning. There is no bathroom. That word bathroom barely exists yet, not as we understand it, not as a room with tile and porcelain and a faucet that releases hot water simply by being turned. No. In this house, and in nearly every house in America in 1850, water does not come to you. You go to the water. The water lives outside. It lives in the well at the edge of the yard, or in the hand pump bolted to a wooden platform just beyond the back door. In winter, that pump handle is iron cold to the touch. In summer, the water that rises through it is cool and slightly sweet, and smells faintly of the earth. To wash even your face and hands, you must first go and get the water. You lower the bucket. You work the pump. You carry the full, heavy bucket back across the yard, through the door, and then if you want it warm, you pour it carefully into a pot and set that pot on the stove. And you wait, patiently. The way people in the 1800s knew how to wait without restlessness, almost without noticing, because waiting was simply part of the texture of life. Inside the bedroom, or the corner of the main room, in smaller homes stands the washstand. This is the heart of daily hygiene. A small wooden table, often with a single shelf or a narrow drawer. On top sits the washbasin, ceramic, white or pale blue or printed with small flowers. Beside it stands the matching pitcher, tall and graceful, filled fresh each morning with water carried in from outside. There might be a small dish of soap nearby, a folded linen cloth, a hand mirror tilted against the wall, a little ceramic cup holding a toothbrush, perhaps a bottle of lavender water, its glass stopper slightly loose, letting the faintest thread of fragrance drift quietly through the room at all hours. This is the bathroom of the 1800s. This simple, beautiful, entirely human arrangement. What I find quietly moving about the washstand is how intentional it is. Everything placed just so. Everything with a purpose. The pitcher and basin are match set because even in a modest household, beauty mattered. Even here, even in the everyday act of washing your face. I think there is something in that worth holding on to. Now, the fire in the stove has just caught. The first grey light is pressing against the window glass, and our protagonist is already awake, already moving toward the washstand, already reaching for the pitcher. Let's follow her there. She wakes before the house does. That is the first thing to understand about her mornings. She does not wake to an alarm. There are no alarms yet, not in this farmhouse, not in this life. She wakes the way people woke for centuries before her, slowly, naturally, pulled up from sleep by the faint shift of light behind the curtain, or by the sound of the wind changing direction in the eaves, or simply by some quiet internal clock that has learned, over years of early rising, to stir her body before the rest of the world is ready. She lies still for a moment first. This is important. This small, still moment before she moves. She lies on her back or her side, facing the window, and she simply exists in the space between sleep and waking. The quilt is heavy over her. The pillow is warm where her cheek has rested all night. Outside, through the glass, the sky is the colour of pewter, that particular deep grey blue that belongs entirely to the half hour before dawn, to no other time of day. She can hear the house breathing around her, the tick of the walls as the temperature shifts, the faint rustle of something a mouse, perhaps, or just the settling of old timber somewhere in the ceiling above, the slow, steady breathing of her husband beside her, still deep in sleep, one arm thrown over the quilt, his hand relaxed and open. She watches the window for a moment longer, then she gets up. She moves carefully, the way you move when you are trying not to wake someone. She lifts the quilt slowly, rolls her legs to the edge of the mattress, sits up in one smooth, practiced motion. The floorboards are cool under her bare feet, noticeably cool, the kind of cool that travels up through the soles and into the ankles, and she pauses on this sensation for just a second, fully present in it, before she stands. She pulls a loose cotton wrapper around her shoulders, pushes her feet into soft leather slippers, and she moves, quietly, to the washstand. You're safe here, tucked in and warm, while we follow her through this gentle morning. Nothing from the outside world can reach you now. Just breathe and let this old, quiet morning unfold. The washstand stands against the wall beside the window. In the dim, pre-dawn light, its white ceramic basin is a pale oval barely visible. The pitcher beside it holds the water she prepared last night, cool now, having sat through the night, and she will need to warm it. This is the first small labour of her morning. She takes the pitcher. It is heavier than you might expect, thick ceramic, smooth and slightly cool to the touch, and she carries it to the kitchen, where the embers in the stove are still faintly alive from the night before. She sets a small pot on the stovetop. She pours perhaps a third of the pitcher's water into the pot, not all of it, just enough to warm. She adds a small piece of wood to the embers, coaxes the fire back, watches the first small flame catch and steady itself, and she waits. She stands at the stove with her wrapper pulled close, watching the water in the pot. She is not impatient. She has done this every morning for years, every single morning, winter and summer, in sickness and in health, and she has long since stopped thinking of it as waiting. It is simply part of the ritual, part of the sequence. The fire, the water, the warmth, the preparation, the care. Historians who have studied 19th century domestic life often note something that I find deeply interesting. For most women of this era, the morning wash was not a rushed, perfunctory act. It was, in a very real sense, the first moment of the day that belonged entirely to themselves. Before the children woke, before the demands of the household descended, before breakfast needed making and animals needed feeding, there was this: the washstand, the warm water, the quiet. It was, in its own small way, a sanctuary. The water begins to steam just slightly, just the faintest shimmer of movement on its surface, and she judges it warm enough. Not hot, just warm, just kind. She lifts the pot carefully, using the thick folded cloth she keeps on the stovetop for exactly this purpose, and she carries it back to the washstand, where she pours the warmed water slowly into the basin, mixing it with the cool water already there. She sets the pot aside. She looks at the basin. The water is still now, perfectly still, a small oval mirror reflecting the pale square of window light above it. And she stands over it for just a moment, not a long moment, just a breath or two, looking at the water the way you look at something that is about to ask something of you. Something small and good. Then she reaches for the cloth. The washing cloth is linen, a simple rectangle, worn soft from repeated washing, hemmed at the edges with a few careful stitches. She dips it into the basin, feels the warmth immediately soak through the fabric and into her fingers, wrings it lightly one slow twist so that it is damp but not dripping, and then she brings it to her face. This is the moment I want to slow down for, this single moment. The cloth touches her forehead first. That first warm contact, the gentle press of wet linen against skin that has been cool all night, cool from the dark, and the sleep and the aired-out room is something that I find so difficult to describe and so easy to imagine. It is, above almost anything else, the sensation of being cared for, even when you are the one doing the caring, even when the hands holding the cloth are your own. She draws the cloth slowly down her forehead, over her brow, across her closed eyelids, gently down the length of her nose, over her cheeks, around her chin, down the front of her neck, where the skin is soft and warm from sleeping. She rinses the cloth in the basin, wrings it again, and she does it once more, a second pass, slower than the first, thorough and deliberate, covering every part of her face with that careful, warm attention. What stays with me when I think about this ritual is how complete it was. We sometimes assume that without running water, without a proper sink and a shelf full of products, personal hygiene must have been cursory, a quick splash and done. But the evidence of diaries and household manuals from the period tells a different story entirely. Women and men took their morning wash seriously. They were methodical about it, careful. A household manual from 1,843 advised readers to wash the face, neck and ears with particular thoroughness each morning, to rinse with cool water to close the pores, and to dry with a clean cloth, not the same cloth used for washing. 2 cloths, always. 1 to wash, 1 to dry. The distinction mattered. She follows exactly this method. After the warm wash, she dips the cloth into the cool, unmixed water remaining in the pitcher, just a small splash poured into the basin's edge, and she brings the cooler cloth to her cheeks, just briefly, just a moment of refreshing coolness after the warmth, the way you might step briefly into the shade on a warm day. And she says, in the quiet of her own thoughts, and I like to imagine this is exactly what she thinks she says, there we are. And she means it. There she is, present, awake, herself. Let yourself rest completely here, warm and unhurried. This old morning happened 170 years ago. It can't touch you. It can only carry you gently forward. You are perfectly comfortable, perfectly safe. She reaches now for the soap. The soap dish sits on the lower shelf of the washstand, a small square ceramic dish, white with a blue rim, and in it rests a bar of soap that she made herself, in the autumn, from the rendered fat of the season mixed with the lye she saved from the wood ash barrel all summer long. It is not a pretty soap. It is pale yellow-grey, slightly rough-surfaced, shaped into a rough rectangle by the wooden mould she pressed it into. It does not smell of roses or lavender or any of the lovely things she has sometimes read about in newspaper advertisements. It smells clean, simply, plainly, powerfully clean, a smell that is almost mineral, almost earthy, with just the faintest edge of something warm underneath. She works a small lather between her hands. The soap is firm, requiring a few firm passes to produce foam. The lather, when it comes, is modest. Small white bubbles, nothing dramatic. But she spreads it over her hands and wrists, works it into the spaces between her fingers, lets it sit for a moment before rinsing it clean. Her hands, when she dries them, feel different. Cleaner in some way that goes beyond the physical. Readier, more themselves. This moves me, this detail, and I want to sit with it for a moment. The act of washing hands in the morning, so simple, so universal, so old as a form of preparation. Not just hygiene, preparation. The body readying itself for the day. The self gathering itself together, piece by piece, in the cool and quiet of early morning, before the world begins. She dries her hands and face on the second cloth, the dry one, as the manuals instruct, and she hangs both cloths over the side of the washstand to air. She looks in the small mirror propped against the wall. She does not study herself critically, the way we might. She looks with a kind of calm appraisal, noting that she is here, that she is well, that the face looking back at her is the face of someone who has slept and woken and washed and is ready. That is enough. That is, in its own quiet way, plenty. The sky outside the window has shifted. The pewter grey has softened toward silver. The first birds are beginning just 1 or 2, cautious and sweet somewhere in the elm tree beyond the fence. Morning has properly arrived, and she is clean, and she is ready, and the day can begin. What I find so beautiful about this, what I keep returning to, every time I read about the morning rituals of 19th century women, is the completeness of it, the way it was done, with both hands, with warm water and care, with the intention of someone who understood that to begin the day well, you must begin it gently. You must begin it with kindness toward yourself. The soap on the washstand shelf came from her own hands. The water was warmed by her own fire. The cloth was hemmed by her own needle on a winter evening months ago. Every single part of this small, quiet ritual was hers. And in a life that asks so much of her, so much labour, so much giving, so much steadiness, that morning wash, that 10 or 15 minutes of quiet and warmth was something she had made entirely, deliberately, for herself. I find this quietly extraordinary. The water in the basin has gone still again, cool now, its work done, She will empty it into the yard in a few minutes, rinse the basin, set the pitcher back in its place. The washstand will be ready for her husband when he wakes, and for the children after him the ritual repeating itself, gentler and quicker for each of them, but present, always present. The warm cloth, the soap, the cool rinse, the dry cloth, the readiness, but first the soap itself. Where did it come from? How was it made? And what, exactly, did it mean to have good soap in the 1800s? That is where we are going next. The soap on the shelf has a history of its own, and it is a longer, richer, more surprising history than you might expect. Because soap, real soap, good soap, the kind that actually cleaned and lasted and did not fall apart in the basin after 2 uses, was not a simple thing to come by in the early and middle years of the 19th century. It was not something you picked up without thinking. It was something you made, or something you saved for, or something you traded for, or something you received as a gift, and unwrapped with a kind of quiet pleasure that I think we have almost entirely forgotten. Let me take you to the making of it first. In nearly every farmhouse kitchen in early 19th century America, there was a barrel, a wooden barrel, set in a corner, or just outside the back door depending on the season, and into this barrel, all year long, went the ash from the fireplace and the stove, the fine grey wood ash that accumulated in the grate every single morning when the fire was cleaned out. The ash was saved carefully, deliberately, because ash was not waste. Ash was a resource. Ash was the beginning of soap. When enough ash had accumulated a process that took months, patient and unhurried rainwater was poured through it. The water leached through the ash slowly, picking up its alkaline compounds as it went, dripping out through a small hole at the barrel's base into a clay pot placed below. What came out was lye water, dark, slightly slippery to the touch, powerfully alkaline, smelling of something mineral and sharp and ancient. A skilled housewife could test the strength of her lye by floating a small raw potato in it. If the potato rose to float with roughly a silver dollar-sized portion above the surface, the lye was just right. If it sank, the lye was too weak. If it rose higher, too strong. This knowledge was passed from mother to daughter, from neighbour to neighbour, in the way that all essential domestic knowledge travelled in this era, by demonstration, by repetition, by careful attention. The lye was then combined with fat-rendered animal fat, saved from the kitchen all year, the drippings from the bacon pan, the trimmings from the butchering, the tallow from beef or mutton. The fat was melted in a large iron kettle over an outdoor fire, and the lye water was added slowly, carefully, the mixture stirred almost constantly with a long wooden paddle, for hours, sometimes the better part of a full day. The stirring was monotonous and tiring, and the smell, the hot fat, and the sharp lye mixing and transforming was not a pleasant one. But the woman stirring knew what she was making. She knew that at the end of this long, hot, aromatic labour, she would have soap, enough soap to last her family for months. Rest easy now, warm and still. You don't need to go anywhere or do anything. Just let this old kitchen rise up around you gently, the smell of wood smoke and rendered fat drifting past like something from a very long dream. The resulting soap could take 2 forms. If the lye was strong and the proportions exactly right, the cooled mixture would set into a firm, cuttable bar, what was called hard soap. More often, especially with a slightly weaker lye, the soap remained soft, a thick, jelly-like substance scooped from the kettle into crocks and stored in the pantry. Soft soap was perfectly effective. It cleaned hands and dishes and laundry equally well, but hard soap was considered the finer product. Hard soap could be cut into neat bars, placed in the soap dish on the washstand, used with a certain satisfaction that soft soap, scooped with a spoon from a crock, simply could not provide. She preferred the hard soap. She thought about this sometimes, standing at the kettle, paddle in hand, watching the mixture slowly thicken this small preference of hers. It was not a practical preference, not really. The soft soap cleaned just as well, but there was something about a proper bar, the way it fit in the palm, the way it could be turned over and examined, the way it felt to press it against the linen cloth and work up a lather. Something complete about it. Something satisfying in a way that was difficult to put into words but entirely real. She understood this. She did not need to put it into words. Now, alongside the homemade soap, and increasingly, as the 19th century progressed, beginning to replace it in households that could afford the change there, was the commercial soap. The story of commercial soap in America is a story of transformation, and it unfolded across the entire arc of the 1800s. In the early years of the century, commercially manufactured soap was a luxury, available in cities, expensive, and often imported. It was scented with lavender, with rose, with almond, and it came wrapped in paper, sometimes printed with the manufacturer's name and a small decorative flourish. To receive a bar of commercial scented soap as a gift was a genuine pleasure. It was kept carefully, used sparingly, saved for Sunday mornings or for company. What stays with me about this, what I find so quietly moving, is the way scent functioned in the hygiene culture of the 1800s. A bar of lavender soap was not just soap, it was a small luxury in a life that did not offer many of them. It was beauty, contained in a rectangle small enough to fit in one hand. It was the smell of the apothecary's shop, those lovely, fragrant, slightly mysterious places lined with bottles and tins and small paper packets, translated into something you could take home and keep on your washstand and use every morning, and each morning be briefly transported by it. I find this quietly beautiful. The way a smell can do that, the way it can lift you, just for a moment, out of the ordinary. The most famous soap of the early 19th century in the English-speaking world was Pears. Andrew Pears, a London barber, had developed his glycerin-based transparent soap in 1807, and by the middle of the century, it had become something of a legend. The soap that wealthy women used, the soap advertised in the finest publications, the soap that smelled faintly of herbs and something clean and slightly sweet and entirely itself. A bar of Pears soap, with its amber transparency, its smooth oval shape, its distinctive smell, was a genuine object of aspiration for many American women of the mid-1800s. And then, in 1879, something happened that changed everything. In a factory in Cincinnati, Ohio, a worker at the Procter & Gamble company accidentally left a soap mixing machine running through his lunch break. When he returned, he found that too much air had been whipped into the mixture. The batch was nearly discarded, but instead, it was made into bars and shipped out, and those bars floated. In the bathtub, in the wash basin, in the kitchen sink, the soap rose to the surface instead of sinking to the bottom to be lost. The response from customers was immediate and enthusiastic. People wrote to the company requesting more of the floating soap. And so Ivory soap was born pure, simple, white, affordable, and floating with the famous slogan, first published in 1882, 99 44 100% pure. You're warm and completely at ease. Let the world outside stay exactly where it is, far away and quiet. You are held here, in this soft and gentle story, and nothing can disturb you. The arrival of Ivory changed the soap landscape of ordinary American homes profoundly. For the first time, a commercial soap was genuinely affordable for middle-class and even working-class families. It was consistent, the same quality, the same smell, the same feel, bar after bar. It was pure white and pleasingly rectangular. And it floated, which remained a source of genuine delight, a small daily miracle at the wash basin. But I want to stay, for just a moment, with the apothecary's shelf, because the general store and the apothecary shop of the mid-1800s were places of genuine sensory richness, places that deserved to be lingered over, the way you linger over a beautiful room. The apothecary, that warm, slightly cluttered, wonderfully aromatic shop that existed in nearly every American town of any size, carried not just medicines and compounds, but the full complement of what we might now call personal care products. On those shelves, small bottles of rose water, pale pink and faintly floral, stoppered with glass and wrapped in tissue. Bottles of lavender water, clear or very faintly purple, smelling of fields even here in Ohio or Indiana or Virginia, tins of cold cream for the skin, small jars of bear grease, rich and unscented, used for everything from hair pomade to chapped lips, packets of tooth powder, neatly folded, little wrapped bars of castile soap, imported from Spain or made in imitation of the Spanish original, olive oil based, softer and creamier than the lye soaps made at home. The smell of an apothecary in 1855 was extraordinary. It was the smell of lavender and camphor, of rosewater and old wood and paper, and something faintly medicinal underneath everything. A clean, astringent quality that told you this was a place of care, a place of remedies, a place where people came to be helped. She visited the apothecary perhaps once a month, when the wagon went into town. She moved along the shelves slowly, reading the labels on the small bottles. Sometimes she bought rosewater, a small bottle, kept carefully on the washstand and used in tiny amounts, a few drops added to the morning basin water on Sundays, or rubbed very lightly into her wrists after bathing. Sometimes she bought a bar of castile soap, a small indulgence, used on her face only, saved and rationed with the careful economy of someone who has learned the value of small pleasures. She always paused at the lavender water. She always picked up the bottle. She always held it to the light, watching the liquid move. She did not always buy it, but sometimes she did. And on those mornings when she added 3 drops of lavender water to her warm basin, and the scent rose up with the steam and filled the small bedroom with something almost like the countryside in summer on those mornings, standing at the washstand in the early light, she felt, very simply, that she was someone who deserved lovely things. Because she was. They all were. And the water is cooling in the basin now, its lavender scent drifting up one last time before it fades. The morning wash is done. The soap is set back in its dish. But there is one question we have not yet answered, one that the woman at the washstand knows better than anyone. Where does all this water actually come from? The labour behind every single drop of it, the carrying, the heating, the hauling, that is what we turn to next. Water in the 1800s was never taken for granted. This is perhaps the single most important thing to understand about hygiene in the 19th century, the thing that underpins every basin, every kettle, every carefully wrung cloth we have followed so far. Water did not arrive. Water was fetched. Every drop of water that touched a human body in that farmhouse, every drop that filled the basin or the pot or the kettle or the Saturday night tub, had been carried there by human hands, often by one pair of hands, often by hers. Let me take you outside for a moment. Step with her through the back door of the farmhouse, out into the yard. The morning is still cool, the light still young and slanted, the grass wet with dew where it grows beside the fence posts. The yard smells of earth and wood smoke, and somewhere nearby, the faint green smell of the kitchen garden just beginning to wake up for the day. The well is at the far edge of the yard, perhaps 30 feet from the back door, close enough to be convenient, far enough to remind you, every single morning, that convenience is something you have to walk toward. The well is a simple structure, a round stone wall rising perhaps 3 feet from the ground, mortared neatly, with a wooden beam across the top holding a windlass, a simple turning mechanism from which a rope descends into the dark below. The bucket hangs at the end of the rope, wooden, iron-banded, worn smooth along the top edge where hands have gripped it 10,000 times. She approaches the well with the easy familiarity of someone who has done this since childhood. She does not think about it consciously. Her hands find the windlass handle without looking. She turns it, releasing the rope, and the bucket drops away from her down into the dark until she hears the soft hollow sound of it striking water far below, and then the change in the rope's tension as it fills and sinks. She turns the windlass back, slowly at first, the bucket heavy now with water, the rope pulling taut against the weight. Then, steadily, evenly, the way her arms have learned to do it, a practiced rhythm, neither rushed nor lazy, just the steady, honest work of bringing water up from the earth. The bucket appears at the top of the well. She grips its handle cold iron, slightly rough with rust at the seam, and she lifts it clear and sets it on the stone wall beside her. She looks at the water in the bucket. It is extraordinary water. I want to pause here and say that clearly, because I think it deserves to be said. Well, water in the mid-1800s, drawn from a properly maintained well in good soil, was cold and clean and tasted of minerals and depth, and something that the word pure actually fits, in its most literal sense. It had none of the additions of modern municipal water. It had come up from the aquifer below, filtered through layers of sand and stone over years and years, and it arrived in that bucket tasting of the earth it had travelled through, slightly sweet, slightly mineral, alive in the mouth in a way that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has only ever tasted treated tap water. She does not stand there appreciating it. Exactly. She is a practical woman, and there is a household waiting, but something in her is aware of it. Something always is. Just breathe now, easy and slow. You don't have to carry anything tonight. Let the weight of the day lift from you completely. You are warm and resting, and everything is entirely, gently fine. She lifts the bucket with both hands. It weighs perhaps 25 or 30 pounds when full, a significant weight to carry across an uneven yard in soft-soled slippers, and she walks it back to the house. She may make this trip 2 or 3 times before breakfast, depending on what the day requires. On an ordinary weekday, once for washing water, once for cooking water, perhaps a third time for the animals. On bath night, Saturday, she will make this trip 8 or 10 times, or more. Historians have calculated, and I find this figure both staggering and humbling, that a 19th century farm wife carried an average of 30 to 50 gallons of water per day, in the warmer months, simply to meet the basic needs of household life. Each gallon weighing just over 8 pounds, each trip from the well to the kitchen door and back, day after day after day. This was not considered remarkable at the time. It was simply the work. It was simply the shape of a day. But I think it is remarkable. I think it is one of the most remarkable and quietly heroic things I know about the daily lives of ordinary people in the 1800s. The sheer, sustained physical effort that went into something we now do by turning a lever on a faucet. The labour that lived inside every cup of clean water, every warm basin, every kettle set to boil. When I think about the woman at her washstand in the morning, the warm water, the clean cloth, the quiet ritual of it, I think about this too. I think about the trips to the well in the dark of early morning, and the weight of the bucket, and the cold handle of the windlass under her hands. And the ritual becomes something different. When you know this, it becomes something earned. The heating of the water was its own process, and it had its own implements, its own rhythms. The primary vessel for heating, washing water was the kettle iron or copper, depending on the household's means, sitting on or beside the stove at almost all times. The copper kettle, when a household was fortunate enough to own one, was a prized possession. Copper conducts heat beautifully faster and more evenly than iron, and a good copper kettle, kept polished and well maintained, would last for decades. It sat on the stovetop with a kind of quiet authority, its rounded belly warm to the touch by mid-morning, its spout ready. The sound of water beginning to heat in a copper kettle, that first faint trembling hiss well before the boil, when the water is just beginning to move, is one of those sounds that I associate entirely with the feeling of warmth and readiness, and someone taking care. She knew her kettle's rhythms intimately. She knew how long it took to reach a gentle warmth, how long to a proper simmer, how long to the rolling boil she needed for the laundry or for the Saturday tub. She did not use a clock to measure these things. She used her ear and her memory and the particular quality of the steam rising from the spout. This is what I mean when I say that the labour of water made bathing feel sacred. Not sacred in a grand or religious sense, though perhaps for some people it carried that quality too. Sacred in the smaller, quieter sense of, this required something of me. This cost something. And in that cost, it gained a weight, a significance, a meaning that goes beyond mere cleanliness. When you carry the water yourself, and heat it yourself, and pour it carefully yourself, into the basin or the tub, the water is no longer just water. It is time. It is effort. It is the decision made consciously and repeatedly, that this person, this body, this self, this member of my household is worth the labour. Let that thought settle over you as softly as a quilt. You are warm here, drifting gently. This world is very far away and very long ago, and it asks nothing of you tonight except to rest. In urban households of the mid to late 1800s, the situation was somewhat different, and gradually, as the century progressed, significantly easier. Cities began installing water mains during the 1830s and 1840s, and by the 1850s, some city houses were connected to a municipal water supply. A pipe ran into the kitchen, and a hand pump inside the house, not outside in the yard, but right there, beside the sink, in the warm kitchen, could bring water up without a trip to the well. This was considered a nearly miraculous convenience. Then came the cistern, a tank, usually in the basement or attic, filled by a roof collection system or by manual pumping, that fed water by gravity through a pipe to the kitchen above. And then, in the grandest city houses of the 1860s and 1870s, came something even more extraordinary: the boiler, a large cast-iron vessel installed beside the kitchen stove that kept a reservoir of hot water available at almost any hour of the day. A tap at the side of the boiler could be opened, and hot water would flow out directly into a pot or basin. To the farmwife making her third trip to the well in a cold morning wind, this would have seemed like something from a fairy tale. But both of them, the farmwife with her bucket and the city housewife with her kitchen cistern, shared something essential. They both understood that water was not free, not in the sense of cost, necessarily, but in the sense of effort and attention and care. Water was something you managed, something you planned for, something you thought about in a way that most of us, today, simply never have to. And that understanding, that deep, daily, bodily understanding of what water costs, shaped everything about how people in the 1800s approached the act of bathing. It made them thoughtful about water. It made them efficient. It made them, in a word, intentional. She carries the last kettle of the morning back to the washstand now, refilling the pitcher for her husband, who will wake soon. She pours carefully, watching the water rise in the pitcher's throat. She does not spill a drop. Of course she doesn't. She never does. The pitcher is full. The stove is warm. The house is beginning to stir around her, a creak from the bedroom, a murmur from the children's room down the hall. The morning is deepening into itself. And come Saturday, all this careful carrying and warming and measuring will culminate in something altogether grander. Come Saturday, the tin tub will come out from the corner. The kettle will be refilled again and again. The kitchen will fill with steam, and the weekly ceremony that every member of this household has been waiting for, in their own quiet way, all week long, will finally begin. That is where we are going next. Saturday arrives differently than the other days. There is something in the quality of Saturday morning light, or perhaps it is simply the quality of Saturday morning feeling that is distinct from Monday or Wednesday or any other day of the working week. It arrives with a faint loosening, a slight easing of the week's tension, like a knot that has been held tight for 5 days finally being allowed to relax just one small turn. The chores are still there, will always be there, but there is something underneath the chores on Saturday, something waiting on the other side of them. There is the bath. In the 1800s, the full-body bath was not a daily event, not even close. For the vast majority of ordinary American families, farm folk, tradespeople, the labouring classes of the growing cities, a complete immersion bath happened once a week, if that. The daily wash at the basin kept the face, neck, and hands clean. A midweek freshen might extend to the arms and upper body, done quickly at the washstand with a dampened cloth. But the full bath, warm water deep enough to sit in, covering the body from the waist down at least, allowing for proper washing of everything that was Saturday's gift. Saturday bath night was not merely custom. It was, by the mid-19th century, something close to a cultural institution. Ministers across denominations encouraged weekly bathing as a preparation for the Sabbath. Household manuals, those wonderfully earnest and practical guides to domestic life, published in great numbers throughout the century, devoted entire chapters to the proper conduct of the weekly bath. Godey's Lady's Book, the most widely read women's magazine in America by the 1850s, regularly printed articles on hygiene and the proper management of the family bath. The message was consistent and clear. A clean body on Sunday was both a physical virtue and a moral one. The weekly bath was preparation for worship, for community, for presenting oneself to the world as someone who took care. This gave Saturday evening a particular gravity, a particular purpose. The tub came out on Saturday afternoon, or early Saturday evening, depending on the household. It lived, the rest of the week, in a corner of the kitchen, or in the woodshed just off the back door, or beneath a bed in the smallest bedroom. It was made of tin galvanized metal, pressed into a shallow oval shape, perhaps 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, with a rolled lip around the top edge that you could grip to move it. It was not deep. In most households, sitting in the filled tub, the water came only to the waist of an adult, or perhaps a little higher. You did not submerge in it. Exactly. You sat in it and washed. But that sitting, that warm water around the lower body, the ability to wash every surface properly, thoroughly, with warm water and soap, it was extraordinary compared to the basin. It was, genuinely, a luxury. Some wealthier households owned a wooden tub staved like a barrel, banded with iron, wide enough to sit in with the knees bent comfortably, and these were considered a significant step up from the tin. Wooden tubs held heat better, were gentler on the skin, and had a certain substance to them, a certain rightness, that the pressed tin variety lacked. But even the tin tub, practical and humble and slightly cold to the touch when you first sat down in it, was deeply, genuinely beloved, because it was the bath, the real bath, the weekly restoration. She began the preparations in the afternoon. The tub was carried from its corner to the centre of the kitchen floor, always the kitchen, always the warmest room in the house, with the big stove blazing and the fire built up high for the occasion. The tub was wiped out with a clean cloth, dried, set in position. Then the water carrying began, trip after trip to the well, bucket after bucket to the stove, the big iron pot, the copper kettle, a second pot borrowed from the top shelf of the pantry, all of them filled and set to heat. The stove was stoked generously, fed extra wood, until the kitchen was warm in a way it never quite was on ordinary weekdays, warmly warm, deeply warm, the kind of warmth that you feel in your back and in your shoulders, and that makes you want to simply stand still inside it for a moment and breathe. The steam from the heating pots curled up toward the low ceiling and gathered there, and the kitchen smelled of warm iron and clean water, and wood smoke, and just faintly, very faintly, of the soap set out on the small stool beside the tub, a fresh piece of the hard yellow soap, and tonight especially, the small cast-iron bar from the apothecary, brought out from its careful wrapping for the occasion of the weekly bath. You are drifting somewhere warm and quiet now, far from anything that needs doing. Let the kitchen steam rise up around you softly. There is nothing here but warmth in this gentle old story, and you are perfectly, completely safe. The order of bathing in a 19th century family was a matter of both practicality and hierarchy, and it followed a consistent logic across most of the country, across most of the century. The water was heated and used communally, not refreshed between bathers, but used in sequence, each person adding a little more heated water from the stove as needed to maintain the warmth. The sequence, almost universally, father first, then mother, then the children from oldest to youngest. This order was purely practical. The water was cleanest at the beginning. Father, who had done the heaviest outdoor labour all week, bathed first. Mother followed. Then the children, in descending age, the oldest getting relatively clean water, the youngest getting water that had been used by the entire family before them. There is a famous saying quoted in numerous histories of American domestic life, though its exact origin is debated: "Don't throw the baby out with the bath water." And while historians differ on whether the phrase was literally inspired by communal bath water, the image it conjures is entirely consistent with the reality of Saturday bath night in a large 19th century family. By the time the youngest child was bathed, the water in the tub had seen considerable use. What I find quietly moving about this, and I do find it moving, genuinely is not the impracticality of it by modern standards, but the communality, the shared water, the shared warmth. Every member of a family, once a week, cleaned by the same water, heated by the same stove, in the same room. There is something deeply human about that, something that speaks to a kind of togetherness that is both entirely ordinary and somehow profound. She helped the youngest children with their baths herself, kneeling on the kitchen floor beside the tub, sleeves rolled, working with the quick, practiced efficiency of a mother who has done this 100 times. She washed their hair, leaning them back carefully, one hand supporting the neck, pouring warm water from a small pitcher over the scalp, and she washed their faces and behind their ears and the backs of their necks, all the places that children reliably forget or avoid. She dried them with a large linen towel warmed by the stove, dressed them in their clean nightclothes, and held each one, briefly, in the warm towel before sending them to bed. Just breathe, easy and slow. Feel how warm and still everything is right now. The world outside is quiet, and you have nothing left to do today but rest. Her own bath came after the children were in bed. This was standard not always, but often, especially in households where privacy was scarce and the mother's moments of solitude were hard-won and carefully preserved. After the children were settled, after the kitchen had quieted, she would refresh the tub water, adding the last of the hot water from the kettle, perhaps a final pot from the stove until the temperature was right again. Not scalding, not cool, just warm, just good. She would take off her wrapper, step carefully over the rolled lip of the tub, and lower herself into the water. I want to stay here for a moment. I want to describe this slowly, because I think it deserves to be slow. The water receives her. That is the only way I can think to put it. It receives her, warmly, completely, the way the bath always receives you, as if it has been waiting. The warmth spreads up her sides and across her back and down her thighs, and she sits very still for a moment, both hands resting on the sides of the tub, eyes half closed, simply feeling it. The kitchen is quiet around her. The fire in the stove has settled to a steady glow. She can see it through the gap in the stove door, the orange pulse of good coals, reliably warm. The candle on the table throws a soft, even light across the kitchen walls. The children are asleep. The house is still. She is, for this brief half hour, entirely alone with warm water and the smell of castile soap and the sound of her own breathing. What stays with me about this, what I keep returning to, is the word earned. Everything about this bath was earned. The water was carried and heated by her own labour. The soap was made or purchased by her own effort. The time, this rare, quiet half hour of solitude, was made possible by the work of the whole day, the whole week, the whole year. Nothing about it was accidental. Nothing about it was automatic. And perhaps because of that, it was not taken lightly. It was not rushed. It was not done with half the mind somewhere else. It was, in the truest sense of the word, savoured. She washed herself slowly, thoroughly, with the castile soap worked into a lather between her palms, spread over every surface of her skin with the careful attention of someone who has waited all week for this. She rinsed with the small pitcher of warmer water kept beside the tub for exactly this purpose. She sat for a while after washing, just sitting in the cooling water, feeling the deep muscular ease that comes after a week of physical labour when warmth is finally, properly applied. Then she rose, dried herself with the warm linen towel, and dressed in her own clean nightclothes fresh from the laundry, smelling of outside air and soap, and for just a moment, standing barefoot on the kitchen floor, warm from the bath and clean from her hair to her feet, she felt completely, simply, radiantly well. This is what the Saturday bath was. Not just hygiene, not just necessity. It was a weekly act of restoration, a returning to oneself, after a week of giving everything to everyone else, a standing still, in warm water, in the quiet kitchen, and simply being a body, a cared-for body, a worthy body for 30 minutes before the next week began. I find this, Every time I returned to it, quietly extraordinary. Clean hair was next, and hair, in the 1800s, was a subject of its own entirely, a ritual of its own, an art of its own. That is where we are going next. Hair, in the 19th century, was not simply hair. It was identity. It was status. It was a woman's most visible declaration of care, of femininity, of personal dignity, and for men too. Though differently, it was a marker of how seriously one took oneself and one's presentation to the world. To have well-tended hair in the 1800s was to signal something important, that you had time, that you had skill, that you had someone or were someone who cared. And the care of it was extraordinary. Let me begin with the brushing, because before we talk about washing or rinsing or any of the lovely aromatic treatments that 19th century women applied to their hair, we must talk about the brushing. The brushing was the foundation of everything. It was done every single day, not once, but twice, morning and evening, and it was done not with the quick, efficient strokes of a modern brush-and-go routine, but slowly, deliberately, from root to end, the full length of the hair, again and again and again. 100 strokes. That was the standard, the ideal, the instruction given in nearly every household manual and ladies' magazine of the era. 100 strokes of the brush through the hair, morning and evening, to distribute the natural oils from scalp to tip, to stimulate the scalp, to smooth the cuticle of each hair, and give the whole its characteristic 19th century shine, that deep, rich, almost lacquered luster visible in photographs and portraits of the period, that particular quality of hair that has been tended rather than merely washed. She sat at the small dressing table in the bedroom, a modest piece of furniture, just a wooden table with a mirror hung above it, a small drawer for pins, a ceramic dish for hairpins, and she took down her hair. This too was a ritual, and it had its own particular quality. Her hair, when it was unbound, fell past her shoulders. It had been pinned up since before morning really, since she had dressed it carefully before the sun was fully up, and the unpinning of it was something she looked forward to, in a way she would have found difficult to articulate, but that was entirely real. The small release of tension at the scalp as each pin was drawn out, the gradual loosening of the whole structure, first a loosening, then a relaxing, then a final, complete release into its own weight, falling soft and warm around her face and neck. She ran her fingers through it first, separating the sections, feeling along the scalp for any tangles before the brush began. Then she picked up the brush. Nothing from the outside world can find you here tonight. You are tucked away in something warm and slow and safe, and all that exists right now is this quiet bedroom, this woman at her dressing table, and the sound of a brush moving through long hair in the evening light. The brush was bone-handled ivory, or more likely the bleached bone of cattle, carved smoothly and rounded at the grip to fit the hand. The bristles were boar bristle, stiff enough to work through the hair but not so stiff as to scratch the scalp. It had belonged to her mother before her. The handle was worn to a perfect smoothness where the thumb rested, a groove of use and time that fit her hand as if made for it. She began at the crown of her head, drew the brush from root to end in one long, slow stroke, felt the slight resistance at the midpoint where the hair was thickest, and then the easing as the brush cleared the ends and lifted free. She counted quietly in her thoughts. Not aloud, there was no need for aloud. This was a private arithmetic, but clearly. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm of it was deeply calming. I think this is something that anyone who has ever brushed their hair slowly, with intention, in a quiet room, will understand immediately. There is something about the repetitive, gentle pull of the brush through the hair, the warmth it generates at the scalp, the way the counting occupies just enough of the mind to quiet everything else that functions almost like meditation, almost like prayer. A steady, rhythmic attention to one small part of the body, again and again, for as long as it takes. By the 50th stroke, her shoulders had dropped an inch. By the 80th, her jaw had unclenched. By the 100th, she was simply there fully, quietly, entirely there. Historians and social commentators of the period understood this well. In an era before there were words like self-care or mindfulness or stress reduction, the 100 strokes of the evening brush were all of those things simultaneously. They were the daily maintenance of the body's most publicly visible feature. They were the prevention of tangles and breakage, and they were, quietly, powerfully, a form of rest. Now, the washing. Hair was not washed as frequently as we wash it today, not by a considerable distance. In most households, most periods of the 19th century, hair was washed perhaps once a month, sometimes less in winter. The daily brushing was understood, correctly, to be a sufficient method of cleaning for normal intervals. The natural oils distributed by the brushing kept the hair healthy and relatively clean, and the frequent washing of hair was thought by many physicians of the era to be actually harmful, stripping the scalp of its natural protection and leading to brittleness or hair loss. When washing day came, however, it was thorough and ceremonial. She prepared her hair-washing water with the care she brought to everything, a large basin of warm water warmer than the face-washing water, because the scalp could tolerate and benefited from greater warmth. And then the additions. Let yourself drift deeper into rest. There is nothing you need to hold on to right now. Just let this warm, fragrant world wash gently over you, like the rinse water itself. Rosemary. First, a handful of fresh or dried rosemary leaves, steeped in boiling water until the liquid had turned a faint gold green and smelled of the herb with a sharp, clean, almost medicinal edge. Rosemary had been used in hair care for centuries before our protagonist was born, it was believed, with some genuine botanical justification to stimulate the scalp and encourage growth, and its scent was one of the most beloved in the domestic herbalist's repertoire. She grew it herself, in the kitchen garden, in a low spreading clump beside the sage, and she dried it every autumn in small bunches hung from the kitchen ceiling, so that it was available all year round. Vinegar. Second, a small amount of apple cider vinegar added to the rinse water, perhaps a tablespoon to a full basin, was a widely used conditioning treatment of the era, and a remarkably effective one. Vinegar is acidic, and it closes the cuticle of the hair shaft, smoothing it flat, which is precisely what creates shine and reduces tangles. The women of the 1800s did not know this in terms of hair cuticles and pH levels, but they knew, from observation and experience passed down through generations, that the vinegar rinse left the hair softer, shinier, and more manageable than plain water alone. The smell of the vinegar, she had always thought, was a small price to pay. It dissipated quickly as the hair dried, and what it left behind was extraordinary. Chamomile. Sometimes, for those with lighter hair, a chamomile infusion used as a final rinse was known to brighten fair hair subtly, to bring out what the manuals called its natural gold, and for darker hair, a final rinse of cool water, plain and simple, to close everything down and set the shine. The washing itself was done leaning forward over the basin, the hair falling forward into the water, fingers working through it with small circular motions at the scalp, not scratching, never scratching, just firm, gentle pressure moving from the hairline back, again and again, until every part of the scalp had been attended to. Then the hair was worked through with soaped fingers, plain soft soap for this, not the hard bar used for the body, and rinsed, 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 until the water ran clear and the hair squeaked, faintly, between the fingers. What stays with me about this ritual is the intimacy of it. Not intimate in the sense of being private, exactly though it was largely private, but intimate in the sense of being close. Close attention, close contact, the kind of care you give to something that matters to you. Drying was done by the fire. The hair was wrapped first in a linen cloth and pressed, not rubbed. Pressing was better. Rubbing caused tangles and breakage, and then the cloth was removed, and the hair was left to dry in the warmth of the kitchen, or by the bedroom fire if there was one, or simply in the warm air of a summer afternoon by an open window. The drying took a long time, an hour, sometimes more, for long thick hair, and this time was used for other quiet tasks, mending, reading, the slow sorting of dried beans, anything that could be done sitting near the warmth with the hair loose and drying around the shoulders. There was something, she had noticed, in the hours after washing the hair, a particular lightness, a particular freshness about the scalp, and the face, and the whole head. The hair, drying clean, smelled of rosemary and very faintly of the vinegar that had almost entirely disappeared, and of something else underneath, something warm and personal and entirely her own, that she associated with cleanliness and the deep, cellular satisfaction of having tended herself properly. I find this so very human, the specific, private, sensory pleasure of clean hair drying in warm air, the way it makes you feel lighter, somehow, more yourself. The brush would be used again tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and the 100 strokes would begin again. But tonight, with the hair washed and drying and the rosemary scent still faint in the air, was its own particular satisfaction, and beyond the hair, beyond the body itself, there was the world of scent. The bottles and waters and little paper-wrapped cakes that lived on the apothecary's shelf and on the washstand, and in the small carved box on the dressing table. The language of fragrance, in the 1800s, was rich and deliberate and deeply personal. That is where we are going next. Scent, in the 19th century, was a language, not a metaphor, a genuine, functional, widely understood language that people used to communicate things about themselves that words could not quite carry. The fragrance a woman chose for her washstand bottle, the cologne a man kept beside his shaving basin, the particular herbal water that a household used on its linens and in its bath water. All of these were statements, small, quiet, deliberate statements about who you were, how you lived, what you valued, and how much care you brought to the daily business of being yourself in the world. I find this quietly extraordinary, the idea that scent was not decoration, not an afterthought, not a luxury added on top of the real business of hygiene, but was itself a form of communication, a form of identity, that what you smelled like in the 1800s was part of who you were. Let me begin with lavender water. Lavender water, sometimes called simply toilet water from the French toilette, meaning the ritual of dressing and grooming oneself, was the most widely used personal fragrance in 19th century America and Britain. It was made by steeping dried lavender flowers in alcohol, usually grain spirits, for a period of days or weeks, then straining and sometimes diluting with distilled water to produce a liquid that was clear to very faintly blue, and that smelled, when you held the bottle close and unstoppered it, of fields and summer, and something clean and ancient and calming all at once. It was used in almost every way imaginable. A few drops in the morning wash basin, so that the steam rising from the warm water carried its scent up into the face and the room. A small amount dabbed on the wrists after washing, or touched to the throat just below the jaw. A drop or two on the handkerchief carried in the pocket or the sleeve. A practice with roots deep in the centuries before our era, when handkerchiefs were partly tools of hygiene and partly portable perfume carriers. A larger amount added to the rinse water for the laundry, so that the clean sheets and nightclothes dried with lavender woven into their very fibres. In a household where lavender water was used regularly, the entire home had a quality about it, a particular clean, aromatic hush that visitors noticed, and that residents had long since stopped consciously registering because it was simply the smell of home, of safety, of the particular, irreproducible smell of a place where someone took care. She kept a small bottle on the upper shelf of the washstand, not the largest bottle, those were expensive, and she used it carefully, but a proper bottle, with a glass stopper that she always replaced immediately after use, so the precious liquid would not evaporate. She had bought it at the apothecary in town 3 months ago, and it was perhaps a third used now. She calculated, without particularly meaning to, that it would last another 8 or 9 months if she continued at her current rate. She was always quietly pleased when this calculation came out longer than expected. There was something in that small satisfaction, in the careful tending of a small bottle of something lovely, that speaks, I think, to something very deep in the human character. The pleasure of having something good, and making it last, and using it with intention rather than carelessness. The pleasure, perhaps most of all, of deserving it. Scientists today know that the olfactory system, the brain's apparatus for processing smell, is more directly connected to the seat of memory and emotion than any other sense. When we smell something, the signal travels almost instantly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, the brain centers of feeling and recollection, bypassing the analytical processing that other senses go through first. This is why a smell can return you to a moment in childhood more completely than a photograph can. This is why certain scents feel like safety, or grief, or joy, before the thinking mind has time to explain why. The women and men of the 19th century did not know any of this in neurological terms, but they understood it experientially with perfect clarity. They knew that the smell of lavender was calming. They knew that rose water on the face in the morning felt like a small, private kindness. They knew that the smell of bay rum on their father's Sunday collar was the smell of Sunday itself, of safety and order, and the world at its best. They used scent, in short, the way it has always been most truly used, to feel more human. Rest easy now, just where you are. Breathe slowly. Imagine, if you like, the smell of lavender, that particular clean warmth of it drifting softly through a small bedroom in the early morning. You are warm and safe, and everything is wonderfully still. Rosewater was lavender water's close companion on the apothecary's shelf, and in many households, the two competed gently for preeminence on the washstand. Rosewater had a longer recorded history even than lavender water. It had been produced and used in Persia since at least the 10th century, had travelled west through the Arab world and medieval Europe, and by the 19th century was available across America in varying grades, from the barely scented cheap variety to the genuine article true attar of roses, distilled from actual rose petals by steam distillation, searingly expensive and gloriously fragrant. Most women of ordinary means use the middle ground, a rose water made by macerating rose petals in pure water or light alcohol, simple and home-producible if you had a kitchen garden and a rose bush. Rose water was paler in scent than lavender, softer, more diffuse. The way a room smells after fresh roses have been in it all day rather than the sharp smell of the roses themselves. It was considered particularly appropriate for the face, recommended as a gentle skin toner, and many women added it to their morning face wash as a matter of daily habit. There was something in the choice between lavender and rose, I think, that spoke to personality. Lavender was sharp and clarifying, bracing in its cleanliness, the scent of purposefulness and order. Rose was soft and enveloping, warm and slightly sweet, the scent of gentleness and welcome. Some women were lavender women and some were rose women, and some, wisely, kept both on the shelf and chose between them according to some private, daily assessment of which self they were greeting in the morning. She was a lavender woman on weekdays, and rose on Sundays. Now, the men, let yourself drift a little deeper, warm and unhurried, the story's moving gently forward, carrying you with it, and there is nothing you need to do but let it. For the men of the 19th century household, the world of fragrant grooming was somewhat differently arranged, but no less present. The item that occupied on a man's shaving stand the equivalent position that lavender water occupied on a woman's washstand was bay rum. Bay rum was made from the leaves of the West Indian bay tree, Pimenta racemosa, macerated in rum or a rum-based alcohol, producing a liquid that was amber to pale gold in colour and that smelled of bay and spice and something warm and clean and faintly sweet. It had been produced in the Caribbean since at least the early 18th century, and by the mid-1800s it was the most widely used men's grooming product in America, applied after shaving as an aftershave tonic, used as a hairdressing, patted onto the face and neck as a general refresher, and carried in small bottles in coat pockets and saddlebags by men who travelled. The smell of bay rum in the 19th century was the smell of a well-groomed man, as clear and immediate a signal as a clean collar or a freshly shaved jaw. Women associated it with their fathers, with their husbands on Sunday mornings, with the particular kind of careful, intentional male self-presentation that the era valued. He kept his bottle of bay rum on the corner of the washstand nearest the shaving mirror, a small oval mirror, slightly foxed at one edge, tilted forward on its wooden stand to catch the window light. Beside the bay rum, his straight razor folded closed with its bone handle. His shaving brush bristles up in a small ceramic cup. His cake of shaving soap, cream-coloured and firm, in its ceramic dish. These objects had a kind of quiet authority about them, arranged just so, used in the same order every single morning. I find this arrangement genuinely moving the dignity of a man's grooming tools laid out with care, ready for a ritual that would begin again at tomorrow's first light. There was also eau de Cologne, which had been produced in the German city of Cologne since the early 18th century, and had spread throughout the Western world as a general-purpose refreshing water. Cologne was citrus-based, lighter and crisper than bay rum, used by both men and women, splashed on the wrists and throat, added to the washbasin water, used on a cloth to freshen the face during long journeys. Its smell was of bergamot and lemon and lavender, and something clean and brisk underneath, and by the mid-1800s it was an entirely respectable article of everyday hygiene. What strikes me most about all of this, the lavender water and the rose water and the bay rum and the cologne, is how consciously, how deliberately people thought about scent. In an era without synthetic fragrances, and without the vast modern landscape of personal care products, people worked with what they had: herbs and flowers, resins and spices, alcohol and water, and they created something genuinely beautiful. They created a sensory identity, a fragrant self. And when she unstoppered her lavender water bottle in the morning, and the steam from the basin carried the scent up into the cool air of the bedroom, she was not just making herself smell pleasant. She was making herself, in some small but genuine sense, more herself, more present, more here. This is what the scent of cleanliness meant in the 1800s. Not perfume as disguise or distraction, fragrance as arrival, as the final aromatic declaration that the morning ritual was complete. But the ritual was not quite finished yet, because beyond the face and the hair and the fragrant water, there were the smaller dignities. The teeth, the nails, the careful attentions to the body's quieter corners, those are what we explore next. There is a particular kind of care that does not announce itself. It does not ask to be noticed. It leaves no visible mark. It is attended to in private, in small motions, with modest tools, and when it is done, the only evidence of it is an absence, the absence of discomfort, the absence of neglect, the quiet and complete sense of having been thorough. This is the care of the small dignities, the teeth, the nails, the ears, the corners and edges of the body that no household manual made famous, that no portrait painter included in his work, but that every person who ever took their own hygiene seriously attended to, with as much care as the face or the hair, because they understood, in that deep and practical way that the 19th century understood most things, that dignity is not selective. You cannot be halfway clean. You cannot care for what people see and neglect what they do not. True cleanliness, the kind that lives in the body rather than merely on the surface of it, is thorough. It goes all the way to the edges. Let us begin with the teeth. Tooth care in the 19th century was taken seriously, more seriously perhaps, than we sometimes assume. The image of the gap-toothed, neglectful 19th century American is not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete. It is true that dental disease was widespread, that access to dentistry was limited and often painful, and that tooth loss was common by middle age. But it is equally true that the people of the era made genuine, sustained, and often quite sophisticated efforts to keep their teeth clean and their mouths fresh. They cared. They tried. And the trying, I think, matters enormously. The primary tool was the toothbrush. Toothbrushes had existed in various forms for centuries. The Chinese had used bristle brushes mounted on bone handles since at least the 15th century. But the form recognizable to us, the small handheld brush with a bone or ivory handle and natural bristles set into a wooden or bone head, became widely available in America during the early 19th century. By the 1840s and 1850s, a toothbrush was a standard item in most households that paid any attention to hygiene, available at the apothecary or the general store for a modest price. The brushes were not soft, as modern dentists advise. They were stiff boar bristle, Firm and somewhat scratchy against the gums, and the brushing technique recommended by the period's dental authorities was vigorous by modern standards. But they cleaned. Imperfectly, certainly, with more abrasion than a modern dentist would recommend. But they cleaned. And the act of using one standing at the washstand, brush in hand, working carefully through the mouth section by section was a deliberate investment in one's own health and presentability that I find, quietly, admirable. She kept her toothbrush in a small ceramic cup on the washstand, bristles facing up to dry between uses. It was her brush, not shared, not borrowed, entirely her own, and she replaced it when the bristles began to splay outward and lose their stiffness, which happened every few months. The new brush, stiff and purposeful, always gave her a small satisfaction, a tool that worked as it was meant to work, a thing in good repair. You are warm and resting, drifting in something gentle and old. Nothing needs your attention tonight. Let your breath slow a little more, easy and natural. You are completely safe here. The tooth powder used with the brush was a matter of considerable variation and personal preference, and this is where it becomes genuinely interesting. The simplest and most widely available tooth powder was precipitated chalk fine calcium carbonate, white and slightly gritty, with essentially no taste of its own. Mixed with a small amount of water, or simply moistened with the wet brush, it provided mild abrasion to clean the tooth surface and was, by the standards of the era, perfectly effective for routine cleaning. It cost almost nothing. It could be bought from the apothecary in small paper twists for pennies, or prepared at home from finely crushed chalk. More interesting, and more widely praised in the health writing of the era, was charcoal. Fine powdered charcoal made from burned wood, known in some household manuals as bread. Charcoal, when made from burned bread, was considered by many 19th century health writers to be the superior tooth cleaning agent. It was mildly abrasive, and it had genuine absorbent properties that helped neutralize acids and reduce odor in the mouth. The problem was obvious. It was black. Brushing with charcoal powder left the teeth briefly coated in a dark paste that was startling to see in the mirror and somewhat alarming to a person unfamiliar with the practice. But the rinsing removed it cleanly, and what remained the dental writers of the era insisted, and were not entirely wrong, was teeth noticeably cleaner and breath noticeably fresher than chalk alone produced. She used a mixture of both, a small paper twist of precipitated chalk as the base, with a pinch of charcoal added enough to do its cleansing work without the drama of a fully black paste. She had arrived at this formula over years of quiet experiment, guided partly by a household manual she had owned since her marriage, and partly by the advice of the apothecary's wife, who had her own firmly held opinions on tooth powder and was always willing to share them. There was also, in some households, the use of dried sage leaves rubbed directly against the teeth and gums before the brush was used as a preliminary cleansing step. Sage has genuine antimicrobial properties. The women of the 1800s did not know this in the language of microbiology, but they knew, from long generations of observation, that rubbing sage on the teeth left the mouth feeling clean and the breath smelling pleasant and herbal. That was sufficient recommendation. It had been grandmother's remedy, and grandmother's mothers before that, and the long chain of its usefulness was endorsement enough. Beyond tooth powder, some households kept small amounts of dried cloves or peppermint leaves for chewing after meals, a breath-freshening practice as old as recorded civilization. A single clove held between the back teeth and chewed slowly released an oil so powerfully aromatic that it freshened the breath for an hour or more and left a warm, gentle, numbing sensation in the gums. She kept a small ceramic jar of cloves on the kitchen shelf, used after supper on evenings when visitors were expected, or simply when she wanted the minor, uncomplicated pleasure of a fresh mouth at the end of a long day. Let yourself settle even deeper into rest. The evening is quiet all around you. There is nothing left to carry. Just breathe, and let this warm old story hold you. The brushing itself was done at the washstand, into a small ceramic cup of water. The mouth rinsed several times afterward until the water ran entirely clear. 3 or 4 minutes, twice a day, every day morning and evening, the way the 100 brush strokes were morning and evening, the way the basin wash was morning and evening. The rhythms of 19th century hygiene were doubled rhythms, the day bracketed by care at its beginning and its end. What stays with me about this, what I find so quietly affirming, is the persistence of it, day after day. Winter mornings, when the water in the pitcher had a thin skim of ice on it before the stove was lit, and the tooth powder was cold against the teeth, and the whole exercise was attended by a certain bracing unpleasantness that required genuine commitment to push through. Summer mornings, when the heat made everything feel sluggish and the idea of one more task felt heavy. It was done anyway, both days, all days. Because clean teeth were not a luxury. They were a basic, daily, non-negotiable act of self-respect. Now, the nails. Nail care in the 19th century was more considered than we might imagine. The ideal, according to the household and beauty manuals of the era, was nails that were clean, neatly trimmed, and smooth at the edges, not the elaborate manicured nails of later decades, but simply tidy, presentable, cared for. The tools were modest. A small metal file, sometimes with a bone handle, for smoothing the edges after trimming, a folded scrap of soft cloth for buffing the nail surface, and a small curved metal instrument, sometimes called a nail cleaner, for removing any remaining traces of soil or work from beneath the nail tip. This last item was carried in small sewing kits and dressing cases, used after washing as a finishing step that completed the cleaning of the hands. Nails were trimmed with small scissors. The curved embroidery scissors from the sewing basket served perfectly well, and the trimming was done by the window, in good daylight, when the day allowed. The filed edges were then smoothed with the cloth, and the whole hand was inspected in the small mirror, with the calm, practical eye of someone who understood that the hands were among the most visible and most judged surfaces of the body, and that their condition spoke plainly about the level of care one brought to oneself. The buffing of the nails, done regularly, produced a faint natural lustre on the nail surface. Not the high gloss of modern nail care, but a clean, healthy sheen that spoke of attention and maintenance. She did this on Saturday evenings after the bath, as part of the sequence of small attentions that accompanied the weekly full wash. File, buff, clean beneath, inspect. Methodical and quiet, and entirely satisfying in its completeness. And then the ears attended to with the same quiet thoroughness as everything else. A carefully folded corner of the damp washing cloth, applied gently each morning to the outer ear and the soft hollow behind it. Unremarkable, consistent, never omitted. This is what I mean by the small dignities. Not grand gestures. Not dramatic cleansings. Just the daily, patient, thorough attention to every part of the body that deserved it, which was every part. All parts. Equally. There is something in this that moves me deeply every time I return to it. The democracy of it. The wholeness of it. The quiet refusal, entirely practical, never ideological, to rank some parts of the body as more worthy of care than others. Every morning, at the washstand, in the early light, she attended to all of it. Face and neck and ears and teeth and hands and nails. Every part. With warm water and care and the unhurried attention of someone who understood that the body is not divided into the parts that matter and the parts that don't. All of it matters. All of it always has. And now that the morning is fully accomplished, the teeth clean and the nails trimmed, and the lavender water on the wrists, we step out of the farmhouse and into town. We follow a man on a Saturday morning to a warm, fragrant, companionable place that was, for the men of the 19th century, everything the washstand was for women, and perhaps rather more besides. We are going to the barber shop. The barber shop smells of warm lather and bay rum and something sweetly resinous underneath tonics and pomades, and the particular, pleasant smell of a room where men have gathered to be tended to, week after week, for years. It is a Saturday morning in town. The main street is beginning to fill with the slow, unhurried traffic of a market day wagons pulling up to the general store, women comparing bolts of cloth on the dry goods porch, children running errands with the slightly exaggerated purposefulness of children who have been given important tasks. And on the corner, beside the hardware merchant and across from the post office, the barber shop sits with its door propped open and its striped pole turning in the mild morning air and from inside it comes the steady hum of conversation and the occasional bright sound of laughter. He pushes the door open and steps inside. The barber shop is a single room, not large, but organized with a particular efficiency that makes it feel complete. 2 barber chairs stand before a long mirror that runs the entire width of the back wall, their wooden frames worn smooth and their leather seats oiled to a dark shine. A shelf below the mirror holds the tools and the bottles, the shaving mugs, the brushes, the strops hanging from their hooks, the small forest of tonic bottles and pomade jars with their hand-lettered labels. A row of wooden chairs along the side wall holds the waiting customers' 3 men this morning, hats on their knees, talking about the price of corn and the condition of the roads east of town. The barber is already at work on a customer in the first chair. He is a compact man of perhaps 50, with the particular steady-handedness of someone who has performed the same precise motions 10,000 times, and has found in that repetition not tedium, but a kind of deep competence that is its own form of satisfaction. He works without hurry. The straight razor moves in long, clean strokes, each stroke followed by a quick wipe against the folded cloth on his shoulder, and the customer in the chair has the particular expression of a man being barbered eyes, half closed, jaw loose, entirely given over to someone else's capable hands. I find this so deeply human. The act of trusting someone else to hold a blade to your face, the profound everyday vulnerability of it, and the ease with which it is offered because the trust has been built, visit by visit, over years. Because the barber knows his face. Because the barber has shaved this jaw in summer heat and winter cold and has never, not once, given him any reason to doubt. The barber shop was, in this sense, one of the great institutions of 19th century trust. A place where a man handed his face, the most personal, most visible surface of himself, into another man's hands, and simply let go. He takes a seat in the waiting row and sets his hat on his knee and joins the conversation about the roads without quite needing to catch up, because the conversation is the kind that has been going on, in various forms, every Saturday morning in this town, for as long as any of them can remember. Just breathe and rest, easy and warm. The story is carrying you forward, gentle and unhurried. You are perfectly safe and perfectly comfortable, and there is nowhere else to be. The straight razor was the central implement of 19th century male grooming, and it deserves to be described slowly, because it is an extraordinary object. It was a folded blade steel, usually Sheffield steel by the middle of the century, because Sheffield had been the centre of English blade making for 200 years, and its straight razors were considered, world over, the finest available. The blade folded into a handle of bone or ivory or tortoise shell, secured by a small pin at the pivot, and when opened, it lay flat and gleaming and formidably sharp in the hand. The cutting edge of a properly maintained straight razor was sharp in a way that is almost alarming, that commands a certain natural respect, that makes the hand move with deliberate, automatic care. To shave with a straight razor required skill. It was not a skill that came immediately. New shavers cut themselves, adjusted, learned. But once learned, it was deeply satisfying. There is a rhythm to it. The preparation of the lather, the stropping of the blade, the angling of the wrist, the pressure and the stroke. A man who had shaved with a straight razor for 20 years could do it in the half-dark of an early morning, by touch and habit and muscle memory, and finish with a face as smooth and clean as anything the modern safety razor could produce. Most men shaved at home, at their washstand, in the early morning, but many, particularly on Saturdays, and for the pleasure and ceremony of it, came to the barber. Because a barber's shave was a different thing from a home shave. A barber's shave was a service, an experience, a half hour of being entirely cared for. And in a life that asks so much of men, the physical labour, the worry, the responsibility of the farm or the trade or the shop, that half hour of being cared for was not nothing. It was, in fact, quite a lot. The barber finishes with his first customer and calls him over. He settles into the chair. The leather seat receives him with a familiar firmness. He looks at himself in the long mirror, straight-faced, practical, the way a man looks at himself in a barber's mirror, and then the barber drapes the white cloth across his chest and shoulders tucking it lightly at the collar, and the transaction is complete. He is in the chair. He is being attended to. The barber prepares the lather. This is the part I want to linger on. The shaving mug is ceramic, always ceramic in a good shop, because ceramic retains heat and inside it is a cake of shaving soap, cream-coloured or pale yellow, with a clean smell that is part tallow and part scent, something faintly floral, something faintly sharp. The barber dips the shaving brush badger hair bristle, soft and dense and heavy with stored water, into a small bowl of hot water, then works it in tight circles against the soap cake until the brush is loaded with a thick, warm, pearlescent foam. Then he applies it to the face. Let this wash over you like warm water. You are drifting now, gently, completely. This old Saturday morning is very far away and very peaceful, and you are safe inside it. The first touch of the warm lather against the jaw is something I suspect every man who has experienced a professional hot shave remembers with great clarity. It is warm in a way that goes immediately into the skin, not hot, not uncomfortable, but warmly present. The way a hand placed gently on the shoulder is warmly present. The barber works the brush in small circles, building the lather through the beard, covering the jaw and the upper lip and the neck with a thoroughness that is both practical and, somehow, deeply comforting. The lather sits for a moment, just a moment, to soften the whiskers. The barber takes up the strop, a long strip of leather hanging from a hook at the chair's side, and he draws the razor down it in long, smooth strokes, alternating sides, realigning the blade's edge with a sound that is a soft, distinctive hiss, leather and steel and leather, until the razor is as sharp as it can be made to be. Then the shave begins. Each stroke of the razor is a small, precise event. The barber angles the blade at approximately 30 degrees to the skin. This angle is everything. The thing that separates a clean shave from a cut and draws it in a firm, even stroke with the grain of the beard, wiping the blade clean after each pass. The sound is a soft whisper, barely audible, the sound of something very sharp, moving through something very fine, and the skin beneath each stroke emerges pale and clean and smooth, with a smoothness that is genuinely difficult to achieve by any other method. He closes his eyes. He thinks about nothing in particular. The price of corn does not occupy him. The roads east of town do not occupy him. He is here, in the warm chair, with the warm lather cooling slightly on the parts of his face not yet reached, and the sound of the razor, and the sound of the conversation around him, and the faint smell of bay rum and tonics and clean soap, and it simply is one of the better feelings available to him in the course of a week. When it is done, the first pass complete, the barber checking his work with the critical eye of a craftsman, a second, shorter pass is made against the grain, catching anything the first missed, leaving the skin not merely shaved, but smooth, in a way that is almost startling to the touch. Then the hot towel, a cloth wrung from near boiling water, pressed firmly to the entire face, held for 30 seconds. The steam opens every pore, removes the last of the lather, soothes the abraded skin into a grateful softness. Then the bay rum, poured into the barber's palm and applied in firm, brief pats to the jaw and cheeks and neck, the sharp, warm, spiced smell of it rising immediately into the air, announcing completion, announcing care, announcing that the job is done and done well. He looks at himself in the mirror. What stays with me about this moment, this particular, ordinary, repeated moment of a man looking at himself in a barber's mirror after a clean shave, is the quiet satisfaction in it, not vanity, not self-congratulation, just the simple, honest pleasure of looking at a face that has been well cared for, and knowing that the care was worth the time, and being, for a moment, simply content. He tips the barber. He retrieves his hat. He steps back out into the Saturday morning, smooth-faced and smelling of bay rum, and the door swings shut behind him, and the striped pole turns, and inside the shop, the next man settles into the chair, and the ritual begins again. Back at the farmhouse, meanwhile back in the kitchen and the yard, the children have woken up, and they have their own relationship with water and soap, and the whole business of being clean, which is to say, a complicated one. That is where we are going next. Children in every era have the same relationship with soap and water. They resist it. Not all of them. Not always. There are children in every generation who take to washing with equanimity, even pleasure, who will stand peacefully at the basin and let the cloth do its work without flinching or squirming, or suddenly developing a passionate interest in something happening on the other side of the room. But on the whole, as a species, the child is not naturally inclined toward being cleaned. The child has better things to do. The child has been running in the yard and climbing the fence and investigating the contents of the woodshed and producing, in the course of these important activities, a quantity of dirt that is, in the child's view, simply the honest residue of a productive morning. Why this should need to be removed is a philosophical position the child has never quite accepted. The mother has a different view. The mother's view is that the child will be washed. The child will be washed thoroughly and regularly, and with the same careful attention to the ears and the back of the neck that the child consistently believes is unnecessary. The mother's view has been consistent across all of human history, and it has, on the whole, prevailed. In the mid-19th century American farmhouse, the washing of children was distributed across the day and the week in a pattern that reflected both the practical constraints of the household and the specific requirements of childhood dirt, which is extensive and creative, and not always confined to the obvious surfaces. The youngest children, infants and toddlers were washed most frequently and most tenderly. A baby in the 1800s was bathed in a small wooden or tin basin, placed on the kitchen table or on a low stool near the stove, the water carefully tested with the inside of the wrist before the baby was lowered into it, a gesture so universal, so consistent across cultures and centuries, that I find it one of the most quietly beautiful images in all of domestic history. The inside of the wrist. Always the inside of the wrist. Because that is where the skin is thinnest and most sensitive, where the temperature registers most truly, where the body says, yes, this is right, this is safe, this is warm enough for a small person who cannot yet tell you if it hurts. She tested the water with her wrist before every bath. Every single one. Even when she knew the water was right, even when she had made it the same way 100 times, she tested it. Because the cost of being wrong was too high, and the cost of being careful was nothing at all. Let yourself rest completely now. You are warm and unhurried, held in something gentle. This old farmhouse morning is drifting past you like a slow current, carrying you softly forward. The baby bathing routine was careful and swift, in equal measure swift, because the baby needed to be kept warm. Careful because the baby was small, and the whole operation required both hands and constant attention. She washed the baby's head first. A handful of soft soap worked into a thin lather between her palms, smoothed gently over the baby's scalp with her fingertips in slow circles, the baby's expression moving through surprise and resignation, and occasionally something that looked very much like pleasure as the warm fingertips worked. Then the face, with a clean, wet cloth eyes, nose, the creases behind the ears, the soft fold of skin under the chin where milk had collected and dried and needed to be found and removed with patient gentleness. Then the body, arms and belly and back and the diaper area, washed last and most carefully of all. Then the rinse. A small pitcher of slightly cooler water poured over the whole, the baby gasping and blinking and sometimes, depending entirely on the individual character of the baby, either laughing or expressing its objection in the most direct possible terms. Then the towel. The large warmed linen towel, wrapped entirely around the baby, the whole small body pressed against the chest and patted dry, carefully, in all the creases and folds, and then held there for a moment, just a moment in the towel, against the shoulder, the baby's damp head tucked under the chin, the smell of clean skin and soap and something warm and entirely specific to that particular small person. This moves me. This always moves me. The smell of a freshly washed baby. There is nothing else quite like it in the world, and the women of the 19th century knew it and prized it exactly as much as the women of every other century have. In letters and diaries of the era, mothers wrote of this smell with a tenderness that needed no elaboration simply. The baby was bathed and was sweet. That was enough. Everyone who had ever held a freshly washed infant understood exactly what was meant. The older children, those who could walk and run and had opinions about being washed, were handled differently. The morning face and hands wash was non-negotiable and fairly quick. Water in the basin, cloth applied to face by the mother or, for older children, by the child themselves under supervision, ears checked, hands inspected, teeth brushed if the child was old enough. This happened every morning before breakfast, as reliably as the fire being lit. There was no discussion about whether it would happen. It simply happened, with the easy authority of long routine. The more thorough midweek wash, a damp cloth applied to the neck and arms and feet, a careful check of the knees and elbows, which were, on children, almost always in need of additional attention, happened on Wednesday or Thursday, bringing the child to Saturday bath night in a state of reasonable order. Nothing from outside can reach you right now. You are tucked safely away in this warm story, and the night is quiet all around you, and you can simply drift. Saturday bath night, for the children, was an event of considerable character. The older ones, children of 7, 8, 9 and above, bathed under supervision but with increasing autonomy. They knew the routine. They knew that the ears would be checked afterward and that the back of the neck would be inspected, and that any attempt to declare oneself finished before these areas had been properly addressed would be met with a return to the basin. They had made this calculation many times and had, over the years, arrived at a pragmatic acceptance of thoroughness as the path of least resistance. The younger children were bathed by their mother, kneeling beside the tub on the kitchen floor, sleeves rolled, a large cloth apron tied over her dress. She had a particular way of washing a small child that was efficient without being rough, thorough without being harsh, a quality of hands that knew exactly what they were doing, that had done it so many times that the movements were nearly automatic. Leaving her mind partly free while her hands did their work, she could be washing a 4-year-old's hair and simultaneously have part of her attention on the pot beginning to bubble on the stove across the room. This was not inattention. It was the finely tuned presence of a mother who had learned, of necessity, to hold everything at once. Hair washing, for the children, had its own small drama, the leaning back over the edge of the tub, the pitcher of warm water poured carefully over the scalp, the child squeezing their eyes shut with theatrical intensity, as if water near the face were a genuine danger to be defended against. The quick lather of soft soap, worked through with the mother's fingertips, and then the rinse, which the child bore with stoic suffering that the mother found, privately, entirely endearing. Then the brisk towel drying of the head, the child's hair sticking up in all directions, their face pink from the warmth, their expression somewhere between indignation and secret satisfaction. She had learned, over years of these Saturday evenings, that the secret to a smoothly bathed child was not authority but pace, not too slow, which allowed time for objections to form and find their voice, not too fast, which produced alarm, just steady, just purposeful, just warm hands and warm water, and the steady, reliable presence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and had done it every week since before the child could walk. The children at the outdoor pump were another matter entirely. In summer, children were frequently sent to the pump to wash after play in the dusty yard or the muddy creek bank. The pump in the yard became on summer afternoons a kind of institution, children taking turns at the handle, water splashing over bare feet and soaking into the packed earth around the pump's base, the water shockingly cold compared to the sun-warmed air, producing shrieks and laughter, and the kind of full-bodied, wholehearted joy that cold water on a hot day reliably produces in small people. There was something purely, irreducibly joyful about this. A child at a pump in summer, pumping cold water over their own head, shrieking at the cold, laughing immediately after this is not a specifically 19th century experience. It is a specifically human experience. It is the same experience that children at sprinklers and garden hoses and city fountains have been having ever since there was water and summer, and the glorious inevitable combination of the two. What strikes me about this, what I find quietly beautiful, is the continuity of it. The absolute sameness of a child's joy in cold water across all the centuries, the ways in which children are, beneath everything, simply themselves curious and resistant and joyful and dirty, and ultimately, after the bath is done and the towel has been applied and the clean night clothes are on, somehow more themselves than ever, more present, softer, ready for sleep. She tucked them in on Saturday night, after the baths, and they smelled of soap and linen and clean skin, and the faint sweetness of children's hair freshly washed. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at them already mostly asleep, already softening into the long, heavy sleep of children who have had a full day and a warm bath, and now have nothing left to do but rest. She thought, they are well. They are clean and well, and they are mine, and I have done this right. And she pulled the door almost closed, and went back to the kitchen where tomorrow there would be laundry to do, because all those clean bodies needed clean clothes to come back to. And the washing of clothes in the 1800s was a labour so significant, so physical, so completely consuming, that it deserves its own chapter. That is where we are going next. Monday was wash day, not Sunday. Sunday was for rest and worship and the quiet pleasures of the Sabbath, for which one was clean, which was the point of Saturday, not Tuesday or Wednesday or any of the days when the other work of the household pressed too close and too loud. Monday, always Monday, in nearly every farmhouse and townhouse and modest city dwelling across 19th century America. Monday was wash day with the same reliable certainty that Saturday was bath night and Sunday was church. It was not a decision. It was simply the shape of the week, and wash day was the hardest day. I want to be clear about this, because I think it is important to understand before we talk about the clean linen, the beautifully clean, sun-warmed, softly fragrant linen that was the reward at the end of it all. The laundry of a 19th century household was not a task. It was a labour. It was a full-day physical undertaking that was, by the reckoning of many historians of domestic life, the single most physically demanding regular task performed by women in the household economy of the era. More demanding than cooking, more demanding than gardening, more demanding than childcare, which was itself continuous and exhausting. Historians who compiled accounts of farm wives' daily labour in the mid-1800s noted, with some consistency, that wash day often began before any other member of the household was awake, and ended after everyone else had gone to bed. It was not unusual for the laundry of a family of 5 or 6 to consume 12 to 14 hours of near-continuous physical work. When 19th century women wrote in their diaries about dreading Monday, and they did, with a frequency and feeling that makes the pages almost ache, it was this that they meant. Not reluctance, not laziness, honest, bodily apprehension of a genuinely hard day's work. Laundry day began before dawn. The water had to be hauled more of it than any other day of the week, far more. The wash boiler, a large tin or copper vessel, oval, wide, deep enough to hold a substantial quantity of water, and laundry simultaneously was filled and set on the stove the night before, or first thing in the pre-dawn dark, so that it would be at a rolling boil by the time the laundry itself was ready to go in. Filling the wash boiler from the well or the pump required multiple trips with a heavy bucket, and the boiler, once full, held perhaps 8 to 10 gallons. This was a significant physical undertaking even before the actual work of washing had begun. The soap was prepared, the soft soap from the crock in the pantry, or a portion of the hard soap shaved into flakes and dissolved in hot water to make a liquid. Everything was gathered. The washboard, a wooden frame holding a ridged zinc or glass panel, over which the wet laundry would be scrubbed, was set in the wash tub. The tub itself, the big wooden one used for laundry and distinct from the bathtub, was positioned near the stove for warmth and access to the hot water. And then the washing began. You are warm and at rest, drifting peacefully. The work of this old Monday morning is not yours to carry. It belongs to another world, another time, very far away and very long ago. You are simply watching, gently, from somewhere safe and soft. Each piece of laundry was handled individually. The linen, the bed sheets and pillowcases and nightclothes and undergarments, Everything worn directly against the skin went into the boiler first, because boiling was considered essential for true cleanliness of the items closest to the body. The theory was not germ theory, not yet. The germ theory of disease was still being established in the 1840s and 1850s, and would not reach popular understanding until later in the century. But the practical observation was perfectly correct. Boiling the body linen produced results that cold water washing could not. It removed stains. It killed what we now know to be bacteria. It left the fabric clean in a way that was visible and smellable and entirely satisfying. The outer clothes, dresses, trousers, shirts were scrubbed on the washboard. This was the part that was hardest on the hands. The fabric was pressed against the ridged surface and moved up and down in a firm, repetitive motion. The soap worked into the weave. The dirt loosened and released into the wash water. With cold mornings were the worst. The water cooled quickly in the tub, the soap stiffened, and the hands already rough from farm work and housework, and the daily handling of iron and wood and water ached in a way that went all the way to the knuckles. She had a method for her hands. A small amount of tallow rubbed into the skin at night, after the washing was done, and the laundry was hung and the day was finally over, worked into the knuckles and the spaces between the fingers and the rough patches along the thumb. Not glamorous, not fragrant, but effective, in the way that the best domestic remedies were effective, practical, and proven, and passed down through generations without ceremony. The rinsing came after the scrubbing and the boiling. Fresh water cold, from the pump, because the hot water was needed for the next round of washing, poured through the wrung-out laundry in the rinse tub, worked through by hand until the water ran clear, and the last of the soap smell faded to almost nothing. Then, the bluing. Let your body grow heavier and more relaxed with every breath. Nothing is asking anything of you. You are simply here, in the warmth, and everything is exactly as it should be. Bluing was one of the quiet wonders of 19th century laundry. White fabric linen, cotton yellows slightly with age and washing, as the fibres take on a faint amber tint that accumulates over time into a dullness that no amount of scrubbing can reverse. The solution was counterintuitive and brilliant, adding a tiny amount of blue dye to the rinse water. A very small amount, a few drops from the little bottle of liquid bluing, or a small square of the pressed bluing product dissolved in a cup of water, first produced a rinse water that was faintly, delicately blue, and this tint, absorbed by the fabric, counteracted the yellow tones optically, and produced cloth that looked not merely washed, but luminously, almost impossibly white. She was careful with the bluing, too little, and it did nothing. Too much, and the sheets came out with a faint blue tinge that was not the intention. The right amount was a judgment built from experience, a matter of eye and memory, of knowing the particular bottle she was using and the particular water from her particular well, and adjusting accordingly. After the bluing came the wringing. This too was a labour of its own. The heavy, water-saturated fabric twisted and pressed between the hands or through the wooden rollers of the wringing mangle. If the household was fortunate enough to own one, water streaming out and falling back into the tub, the fabric gradually lightening and stiffening as the water left it. And then the hanging. The hanging of the laundry was, in some ways, the part I find most beautiful. It happened outside, weather permitting, the wet laundry carried in the basket to the clothesline strung between the fence post and the elm tree, each piece shaken out and smoothed and pinned with the wooden clothespins that lived in a cotton bag hung from the line itself. The sheets went up first, billowing immediately in the breeze, enormous and white and clean-smelling even before they had dried, filling the yard with a freshness that was partly soap and partly open air, and partly something that had no name but was entirely its own. This is the smell I want you to hold for a moment. The smell of laundry drying in a light breeze on a Monday morning in the 1800s, sheets and pillowcases, and clean cotton shirts snapping softly in the wind, the sun working on them, the breeze carrying the last of the water away, leaving behind only the clean fabric and the particular warmth of cloth that has been dried in open air and sunlight. There is no laundry product in the world that has ever successfully reproduced this smell. It is the smell of actual wind and actual sunlight absorbed into actual clean cloth. It is, I believe, one of the genuinely irreplaceable sensory pleasures of domestic life, and the fact that so few of us experience it regularly anymore is a small but real loss. She knew this smell intimately. She had known it her entire life, from her mother's wash days, from her own years of laundry, from every Monday morning spent at the line, hands cold on the clothespins in autumn, face warm in the summer sun, hanging the clean things up and feeling, every single time, that particular satisfaction of work well done, made visible and fragrant before her eyes. The dry laundry came in off the line by afternoon, stiff and sweet-smelling and sun-warmed, carried in the basket to the bedroom where the ironing would happen later in the week, and stacked in careful piles on the shelf or laid across the back of the chair. The ironing itself was its own quiet ritual, the flat irons heated on the stove and tested against the back of the hand, the careful press of hot metal against clean fabric, smoothing each piece into its final, finished form. A freshly ironed sheet, folded with precision and placed on the linen shelf, was a small and real form of beauty. Clean sheets on clean bodies, after the Saturday bath. This combination, the freshly washed body meeting the freshly laundered sheet, was one of the quiet peaks of physical comfort available to ordinary people in the 19th century. Not a luxury, not a special occasion, just Monday's labour meeting Saturday's labour, coming together in the bed on a Sunday night in a farmhouse somewhere in America, in the year 1852, in the form of clean linen against clean skin. And this simple, complete, entirely human satisfaction brings us to the very last chapter of our story, because everything we have followed, the basin, the soap, the tub, the linen, was about to change, slowly, irrevocably, and in ways that were both a gain and, quietly, a loss. The bathroom was coming. Change, in the 19th century, came slowly. Not the way it comes now, not in sudden announcements, not in updates and overnight transformations that make last year feel like ancient history. In the 1800s, change arrived the way a tide arrives, gradually, persistently, and so incrementally that the people standing on the shore often could not say, looking back, exactly when the water had reached their feet. They knew only that it had, and that the ground felt different now, and that there was no going back to the dry sand behind them. The bathroom arrived this way, not all at once, not for everyone simultaneously, not in a single decade or even two, but across the latter half of the 19th century, beginning in the grand houses of the wealthy in the 1840s, and spreading slowly, steadily, decade by decade, into the homes of the middle class and eventually the working class. By the century's final years, the dedicated room for bathing came into being. A room with a floor that could get wet. A room with a drain. A room with, eventually, a tub that stayed in place and a basin with a tap that delivered water on demand and, most miraculous of all, a boiler that made that water hot. The first proper bathrooms in American homes appeared in upper-class city houses in the 1840s and 1850s, and they were objects of genuine wonder and considerable expense. A bathtub of the era was a serious piece of furniture, a large freestanding vessel of copper or zinc or tin, sometimes lined with porcelain, sometimes with smooth wood. It required installation by a plumber, connection to whatever water source served the house, and often a dedicated hot water boiler fed by the kitchen stove. The room around it was tiled or oilcloth floored for waterproofing, and it contained, in the grandest versions, a wash basin with taps, a mirror on the wall, a towel rail, and sometimes a water closet, the indoor privy that was, by the standards of the time, as miraculous as anything else in the room. To have a bathroom in 1855 was to be wealthy. There was no ambiguity about this. It was a clear and conspicuous marker of prosperity, and the households that possessed one were not shy about it. Magazine articles of the era described bathrooms in terms ordinarily reserved for drawing rooms. The quality of the tile work, the elegance of the fittings, the particular luxury of the hot tap. For the readers of those articles, women of the aspiring middle class, Reading by lamplight in houses still equipped with washstands and tin tubs and Monday laundry days, these descriptions functioned as aspiration and entertainment. Something to imagine, something to want, something that felt, in the warm kitchen on a wet Monday, like a very beautiful and slightly impossible dream. The clawfoot tub became the great icon of the late Victorian bathroom. Porcelain-coated cast iron, gleaming white, raised on 4 curved iron feet so that the floor beneath could be cleaned easily. It was practical and beautiful simultaneously, in that way that the best Victorian design often was. The tap above it, turning smoothly on its fixture, delivering water at the twist of a wrist, cold from one tap, hot from the other, represented something almost philosophical. The subordination of nature to domestic convenience, the bringing of the well inside the house, the ending of the long walk across the cold yard in the dark, hot water, on demand, on any morning, without labour, and the bathroom itself was becoming something more than a room with a tub. It was becoming a private world. The door that locked, the porcelain tiles cool and smooth underfoot, the mirror large enough to see your whole face clearly, in proper light, the hooks for towels and robes, the shelf for all the bottles, the tooth powder and the lavender water, and the hair oil gathered together at last, in one place, organised and present, a dedicated space for the body's care, everything the washstand had been, and more. Rest deeply now, soft and warm. There is nothing to reach for tonight. You have everything you need right here, in the warmth of this quiet hour. Let the story carry you gently the rest of the way. Through the 1860s and 1870s, the bathroom began its slow descent from the houses of the wealthy into the homes of the broader middle class. The expansion of municipal water systems in American cities meant that more homes had access to piped water, removing the single greatest obstacle to indoor bathing. The development of more affordable plumbing fixtures brought the cost of installation within reach of households that could not have contemplated it a decade earlier, and the growing influence of the sanitary reform movement advocates who argued, with increasing scientific backing, that regular bathing was essential to the prevention of disease, created a cultural pressure that the new bathroom was perfectly positioned to satisfy. By the 1880s, the bathroom had become a realistic aspiration for many American families, not yet universal, not yet expected, but achievable. And for the families who finally achieved it, who had the tub installed, the pipes run, the boiler connected, and turned the hot tap for the very first time, watching clean hot water pour in without a single trip to the well, the experience was, by all accounts, something between convenience and revelation. A turning point. The before and the after. She heard about it first from her neighbour's daughter, who had married a man in the city and wrote letters home describing the new bathroom in their townhouse with a barely contained excitement that she found, reading the letter at the kitchen table, completely understandable. Running water, a fixed tub, hot from the tap. No carrying, no heating, no calculating how many kettles it would take, no trips to the well in the dark. She set the letter down. She looked at the copper kettle on the stove. She thought about Monday, about all the Mondays, about the weight of the bucket and the cold of the pump handle and the long, honest labour of every wash day she had ever lived through, the years of it, the accumulated weight of it, carried on the same pair of hands, winter and summer, year after year. She thought about the water, how she had carried it, and warmed it, and poured it, and how in all that carrying and warming and pouring, it had become something more than water. It had become care made visible, effort made warm, and then she folded the letter carefully, tucked it into the kitchen drawer, and went to fill the kettle, because the kettle still needed filling, and the morning was not yet done. She was a practical woman. She understood that the world changed around you whether you were ready or not, and that the best response was neither grief nor resistance, but the steady, patient continuation of the work in front of you. What strikes me most about the arrival of the bathroom is what it gave, and what it quietly took away at the same time. What it gave is obvious and real: ease, access, frequency, convenience. the ability to bathe daily rather than weekly, the privacy of a room with a door that locked, the luxury of genuinely hot water in unlimited quantity. These are real gifts, and I do not want to romanticize their absence. But what it took away was subtler and worth naming. It took away the ceremony. You are safe and warm, drifting in the soft dark. This is the last chapter of our journey tonight, and it is carrying you gently toward rest. There is nothing to do now but let go. When bathing required effort, when it meant carrying water and heating it and preparing the kitchen and waiting for the children to sleep, bathing was an event. It had weight. It had significance. The Saturday bath was not merely a hygienic procedure. It was a ritual, a weekly ceremony of restoration that the entire household participated in and looked forward to. It had a before and an after, a preparation and a completion, a cost and a deeply felt reward. The daily shower, for all its genuine convenience, does not quite have this. It is, by design, unremarkable. Something you do before leaving the house, as automatic and unconsidered as tying your shoes, and there is real value in that automaticity in the democracy of clean skin available without effort to anyone with a functioning shower. I do not dispute this for a moment, but I find myself returning, always, to the woman at the washstand, to the copper kettle and the ceramic basin, and the small bottle of lavender water with its glass stopper, to the Saturday kitchen, warm with steam, the children in their nightclothes smelling of soap, to the deliberate, effortful, entirely conscious act of caring for a body because it deserved to be cared for. By the 1890s, the daily bath was becoming not just possible, but actively recommended by the new hygiene literature, driven by the spread of germ theory and the increasing availability of the means to bathe daily. The world had moved on. The washstand was beginning to feel like the past, change, arriving like a tide. Perhaps she turned that first hot tap herself, one autumn morning, and felt wonder and gratitude, and underneath both, a small and quiet tenderness for the copper kettle still sitting on the stove across the hall, for the ceramic basin, for all those cold mornings at the well, bucket in hand, breath visible in the air. Or perhaps she had remained at her washstand all the way to the end, with her ceramic basin and her copper kettle and her small bottle of lavender water, and if so, I do not think she was diminished by it. Not at all. I think she had something that the bathroom, for all its genuine gifts, could not quite replace. She had the ritual. She had the intentionality. She had the daily, quiet, deliberate act of saying with warm water and a clean cloth, in the early morning, before the world began, that she was worth caring for. And she was. They all were. All of them, the farmers and the barbers and the mothers and the children, the women at their washstands and the men in their barbershop chairs and the babies in their kitchen basins, all of them tending to themselves with whatever they had, in whatever time they could carve from the day, because the body deserves warmth, the body deserves care, the body deserves the gentle, deliberate attention of someone who understands its worth. They understood it, and so I think do you. We have come a long way tonight, from the farmhouse kitchen in the pre-dawn dark, where a woman first reaches for a pitcher of barely warm water, through the soap-making and the apothecary's shelf, the well and the kettle and the Saturday tub, the 100 brush strokes and the lavender water and the barber shop on a Saturday morning, through the children at the pump and the laundry on the line and the slow, inevitable arrival of the room with the door that locked and the tap that turned. We have travelled, in a sense, the entire arc of a century, and now I want to sit with you here for a moment, at the end of all of it, and reflect on what it means. What it all means. Not just historically, not just as a story about soap and water and the mechanics of 19th century hygiene, but in the deeper sense, the human sense, because I believe that what we have been following tonight is not really a story about bathing, it is a story about dignity. Let me say that again, and let it settle for a moment. Dignity. The word comes from the Latin dignitas, worth, merit, the quality of being deserving. And what I have seen, in every basin and every kettle, and every carefully wrung cloth we have followed through this night is the quiet enactment of that idea, the practical, daily bodily assertion that a human being has worth, that the body has worth, that the effort of caring for it is not wasted effort, not vanity, not an indulgence, but something fundamental, something necessary, something as important as any other work a person does in the course of a day. The woman at the washstand understood this, even if she did not have these words for it. She did not stand there thinking about dignity or philosophy or the Latin roots of worth. She stood there dipping a linen cloth into warm water and pressing it to her face, and something in her, something quiet and sure and entirely practical, knew that this was right, that this was necessary, that this small act of warmth and care was as important as the bread she would bake, and the children she would tend, and the field her husband would plough before noon. You are warm and drifting, held safely in the deep quiet of this hour. There is nothing left to do tonight but rest. Let these thoughts settle over you as softly as a quilt. What moves me most, thinking about all of this, and I have spent a long time thinking about it, is the constancy of it. The fact that this impulse, this desire to be clean and cared for, to tend the body with warmth and intention, is not a product of any particular civilization or culture or century. It is older than the 19th century. It is older than soap. It is older, probably, than any record we have of human beings doing anything at all. Wherever people have lived, they have washed. In rivers, in rain, in carved stone basins filled with spring water, with sand, with ash, with plant oils, with whatever the earth offered that could be combined with water to lift the day's accumulation from the skin. In every language on earth, in every century of recorded history, in every climate and culture and circumstance, human beings have found ways to be clean. Not because cleanliness was enforced, not because someone commanded it, but because something in us wants it, something in us needs it. The clean face in the morning, the fresh cloth against the skin, the water that is just warm enough. Archaeologists have found evidence of soap making in ancient Babylon, nearly 5,000 years ago. The ancient Egyptians bathed with regularity and kept detailed records of their cleansing oils and natron salts. The Romans built their famous public baths as centres of civic life, places where the whole city came together around the shared act of being clean. Every civilization, every century, the same impulse, finding its own particular expression in the tools and materials available to it. This is one of the deepest threads running through all of human experience, and I find it, genuinely, one of the most beautiful. Think about what we have seen tonight. Think about the woman at her washstand in a farmhouse in 1850, dipping her cloth into warm water before sunrise. And think about yourself, right now warm in your bed, drifting towards sleep, having washed your own face at your own basin or your own shower, at some point today, in your own way, with your own water and your own soap. You are separated from her by 170 years, by electricity and indoor plumbing and commercial soap, and everything else that the intervening century and 3/4 has brought. And yet the act is the same. The impulse is the same. The warm water and the clean cloth and the moment of quiet attention to your own face, these are yours and hers both, simultaneously, the same gesture made across all that time. I find this quietly extraordinary, that something so simple should connect us so completely, that the most basic act of self-care should be, in some deep sense, the same act in 1850 and in the year you are living in now. Just rest here for a moment, softly. You don't need to hold on to any of this. Just let it move through you, gently like warm water. There is something else I want to say, and I want to say it carefully, because I think it matters. In a world that asks a great deal of us, that asks us to be productive and efficient and available, and always somewhat more than we currently are, the act of caring for the body is a form of resistance, a quiet, private, entirely personal form of resistance. It says, I am not only what I produce, I am not only what I accomplish, I am also this body, this skin, these hands, and this body deserves warmth. This body deserves the 10 minutes of quiet in the morning, The warm water, the careful attention. The woman at her washstand was not a person with many freedoms. The shape of her life was largely determined by forces outside her control. The seasons, the farm, the children, the economy, the expectations of her era. Her time was not her own in any of the ways we might take for granted. She could not simply decide not to cook, or not to tend the animals, or not to be there when the household needed her. Her days were structured by necessity from first light to last, but those 10 or 15 minutes at the washstand were hers, entirely hers. The warm water she had heated herself, the soap she had made or saved for, the linen cloth she had hemmed on a winter evening, all of it made by her, chosen by her, for herself. A small territory of self-determination in a life with few such territories. I think this is why the morning wash was a sanctuary. I think this is why she returned to it every single day, winter and summer, even when the water was cold and the stove was slow and the children were already calling from the next room, because it was hers. Because it was, in the most literal and most important sense of the word, an act of self-care, of saying, I matter enough for this, and she did, and you do. What stays with me, at the end of all of this, is not any single historical fact or detail, not the ivory soap or the Saturday tub or the bay rum on the barbershop shelf, as much as I love all of these things. What stays with me is something softer and more durable than any of those details. It is the image of ordinary people, in ordinary circumstances, taking care of their bodies with warm water and clean cloth, taking care of their households with lye soap and the wash boiler, taking care of their children with the wrist-tested bath water and the warm towel, taking care of each other, the barber's steady hand, the neighbour's recipe for tooth powder, the apothecary wife's firmly held opinions about charcoal and chalk, taking care, simply, consistently, without drama or fanfare, as a way of being in the world. This, I believe, is what cleanliness has always been, not a hygiene protocol, not a social performance, but a practice, a daily practice of turning toward yourself and toward the people you love and saying, through the language of warm water and soap and clean linen, you matter, this matters, we are worth taking care of. They knew this, the people of the 1800s, in the way that people who have to work for everything they have tend to know things deeply, practically, without sentimentality, but with complete conviction. They worked for their clean water. They worked for their soap. They worked for every warm bath and every laundered sheet. And because they worked for it, they knew its value. We are, most of us, more fortunate than they were. The water comes when we turn the tap. The soap is always available. These are genuine gifts. But I hope that tonight, listening to this, you have felt something of what they felt. Something of the particular warm, specific pleasure of warm water on a cool morning. Something of the satisfaction of the clean face and the clean hands and the clean start to a new day. Something of the old, deep, entirely human knowledge that you are worth caring for. Because you are. You always have been. And tomorrow morning, when you wash your face in whatever way you wash your face, with whatever you have, in whatever light, I hope you will take just a moment. Just a small, slow, unhurried moment. A moment of the kind that the woman at the washstand took every single morning before the day began. Feel the warmth of the water. Notice it. Be present in it. And think, if only briefly, of all the hands that have held a cloth like this one in all the years before yours. You are part of a very long, very human, very beautiful tradition. Sleep well. You have earned your rest. And so we leave her there, at the washstand. In the early morning, the water still warm in the basin, the steam long gone now, the room beginning to fill with the first real light of the day, the soap back in its dish, the two cloths draped over the side to dry, the small bottle of lavender water stoppered and replaced on its shelf, its work done for one more morning. She looks at herself in the mirror for just a moment, and then she turns, and the day begins. We leave her there, and we leave the century there with all its labour and its ingenuity and its quiet daily insistence on caring for the body as an act of worth. The tin tub in the Saturday kitchen, the brush strokes, counted in the evening quiet, the bay rum on the barbershop shelf, the laundry on the line, white against the blue Monday sky, the lavender water bottle, used sparingly, made to last, treasured in the small way that only truly useful things can be treasured. We leave it all there, in the warmth of the past, where it belongs, and we come back here, back to this room, back to this dark and this quiet and this bed that is holding you completely right now. You are safe here. You always have been. Nothing from that old world can reach you. It is long ago and far away, and all it has ever asked of you tonight is to listen and to rest. So let it go now. Let the farmhouse and the washstand and the copper kettle and the Saturday tub all drift away, slowly, the way things drift in the last moments before sleep. Not gone. They'll be here when you come back to them, if you ever want to return, but set aside, gently, like setting down a book you have been reading with great pleasure and do not quite want to finish, but whose ending you trust. Let them drift. Let your breathing slow one more time. Feel the weight of the bed beneath you, the warmth of the covers over you, the softness of the pillow under your head. These are real things, right now things, and they are entirely yours. You have done something gentle tonight. You have given yourself a quiet hour, an hour of warmth and slowness, and the particular comfort of history that is beautiful without being frightening, human without being heavy, an hour of going somewhere and coming back, and finding that the coming back is easy and warm and entirely welcome. I am glad you are here. I am always glad when you are here. This has been Sleepy History with Alan, and if tonight has carried you somewhere peaceful, if the washstand and the lavender water and the slow Saturday kitchen have found their way into your dreams and made them gentle, then everything I hoped for has happened. Next time, I want to take you somewhere equally warm and equally far away. We are going to follow the bakers of the 19th century, the women and men who rose before anyone else in the household, before the sun, before the fire was even properly lit, and began the long, slow, deeply satisfying work of making bread. We will follow the yeast and the flour and the warmth of the proving oven. We will smell the loaf coming out of the bake, that extraordinary smell that is perhaps the most welcoming smell in all of domestic history. We will sit in a warm kitchen at 4 a.m. and listen to the bread rise. But that is for another night. Tonight you are done. The story is done. The journey is complete. All that remains now is sleep. Real, deep, restoring sleep. The kind that comes when the body is warm and the mind has been given something beautiful to hold, and the night is quiet and long and entirely safe. Let it come. Let it come the way the morning comes in that old farmhouse, slowly, gently, without announcement, the light simply arriving because it is time, because the world is tilting toward it, because everything, always, moves toward warmth. Let the warmth come, let the dark deepen, let go. Good night, my friend. Sleep well.